Hello and welcome to 6 Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series, What If Deku Had a Amaterasu Quirk. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
The human body's quirks are a magnificent genetic mystery. Quirks have had a significant impact on how life and society functioned ever since they first emerged a few centuries ago. There were shadows where there is light, but quirks were so magnificent that they glowed like a bright light. Such as the prejudice against users of heteromorphic quirks who simply differ in appearance. Some quirks are even viewed as intrinsically malevolent, leading others to perceive the user as innately malevolent. Despite the fact that none of those individuals are fundamentally evil, their circumstances cause them to become resentful and hateful, which ultimately makes them evil. Heroes are based on the enduring notion that people are inherently evil. They fight to prevent those who would do harm to others. Additionally, they make every effort to promote mutual acceptance. However, despite their best efforts, the hero industry is tarnished by a few bad actors. However, a small percentage of people have a very depressing mindset that is totally ignored. And that's the idea that people despise their peculiarities and identity. 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya was a typical child with green eyes and hair, freckles, and a contagious smile. He was playing a game with his best friend, Bakugo, while running around the public park on a pleasant day. In their game of heroes and villains, both boys pursued a different boy who declared he would be the antagonist. Bakugo yelled, "Stop right there, stupid villain," as he pursued with his pails in close pursuit. Bakugo had Izuku right behind him. Bakugo used his newly acquired explosion quirk, and the smoke he emitted hit Izuku repeatedly as they ran. Bakugo rashly pursued the game's antagonist using his explosion quirk as a speed boost. Since his quirk had not yet materialized, Izuku ran as quickly as his legs would allow him to do so. However, he had an appointment with the quirk doctor tomorrow to find out what it was. And as he pursued Bakugo, his excitement was evident on his face. The other boy ducked around them, running around trees and other obstacles, and everyone kept chasing after him. But Bakugo was getting closer as more explosions rang out behind him. Bakugo used his quirk to launch himself at the boy with an even larger explosion, which allowed him to tackle and hold him to the ground. When Bakugo proclaimed his victory with a loud explosion and a shout, there were cheers of triumph. Bakugo vigorously yelled, "Yeah, I win! Don't move, villain, or you'll regret it," while pinning the boy to the ground, making it obvious that he would use an explosion at close range if needed. Izuku and the others rushed to the villain boy who had been apprehended. Congratulating Bakugo on his successful pursuit, Izuku rushed over. "Yeah, you tell him, Kachan, when you grow up, you'll be the best hero ever." "Heck yeah, I will, Zuku, and once you get your quirk, we'll be the best heroes to ever live." Since birth, Izuku and Bakugo were essentially best friends. It made sense for their sons to be friends with their mothers, who had been friends for a long time. Together, the two boys did everything. Went to school, completed homework, played a variety of games, and occasionally got into arguments because Bakugo saw Izuku as a potential rival. From the top of a hill, Inko was grinning maternally as all the boys congratulated Bakugo on his successful takedown. "Boys, lunch is ready, so come over and get some food." When Inko screamed at the boys, they all turned as if they were one big group and started running over to get food. Mitsuki sighed as he sat on a lawn chair and looked down at all the rowdy boys. The two childhood friends were pushing each other to get ahead of each other, and she sighed again as she held a drink in her hand. "Damn, I didn't think Katsuki's quirk would be as explosive as his personality. Sorry if his aggressiveness is rubbing off on Izuku, Inko. I know Izuku's a kind boy, but with Katsuki around he seems to be more physical with him." "There's no need to apologize, Mitsuki. I am sure Izuku's good nature will rub off on Katsuki." Katsuki has even started acknowledging other people again after the initial shock from his quirk awakening wore off. After all, Mitsuki was sick of putting out the little fires Bakugo started when he was playing with his quirk, so she said, "I sure fucking hope Izuku rubs off on him. I don't want to put out fires all the time." The boy even had the audacity to criticize her for it. "Mitsuki, don't swear in front of the boys. If you do, there's no doubt in my mind that Katsuki will pick it up." Bakugo and Izuku kept fighting to see who could reach their destination first as they ran. They were trying to topple each other by pushing and shoving one another. However, nobody fell, so Bakugo decided to take advantage of his peculiarity and quicken his pace. Bakugo grinned as he ran faster than Izuku, gloating, "Hey, no fair, Kachan, I don't have my quirk yet." Bakugo was eager to start eating when he exclaimed, "Can Izuku? I win. Hey Auntie Inko, can I get my plate first?" Now, Katsuki, you need to wait for everyone." Izuku took second place, followed by Bakugo, who merely sneered. The boys would talk and even fight again with smiles that afternoon, and there would be lots of laughter. Both moms grinned as they observed their sons enjoying themselves with the local boys. When Inko saw Izuku's enormous, sincere smile, she felt a rush of warmth. Inko loved seeing that smile on Izuku's face and wished her son would always be this happy. She therefore reminded herself to make every effort to give Izuku the best life possible. The following day arrived sooner than the Midoriyas had anticipated, and they wasted no time. When their names were called for the appointment back in the waiting room, Izuku and Inko were waiting tensely in a doctor's office. Izuku was awaiting the results of his quirk tests, which were completed by a nurse himself. As he waited, Izuku was chatting away to his mother in fast-paced sentences that were all conjectures about the type of quirk he might acquire. As her son continued to talk, Inko simply grinned at him in the hopes that he would acquire a peculiarity that would bring him joy. Izuku kept saying things, and Inko remained silent, hoping that Izuku would eventually run out of things to say so he would stop. "I hope it's a fire quirk like Dad's. But a telekinetic quirk like yours would be so cool, Mom. I wonder if they combined. What if mine mutated?" Izuku spoke so intently that he failed to notice the door opening while the doctor held his test results. As Inko patted Izuku's head to calm him down, the doctor hurriedly sat down in a chair. Izuku became excited when he finally noticed the doctor. The doctor grinned and looked at Izuku, who was about to burst with excitement. "Well, you're excited about today, aren't you, kid?" he asked. The doctor laughed at Izuku and noticed the smile on Inko's face. "Of course, I am. I get to find out what my quirk is today," he said. The doctor opened the folder, cleared his throat, and started to review the results, saying, "Don't worry, kid, I have your test results right here. Okay, Ms. Midoriya. You'll be glad to hear Izuku has a quirk and an extremely powerful one based on his quirk factor, and based on the quirk potential tests he took. The quirk factor is predicted to grow much larger." Izuku was ecstatic when he first heard the news and listened to the positive aspects, but the doctor sighed and continued to explain. However, Izuku noticed that the doctor's expression changed to one of puzzlement as he reviewed the results. "But there is something weird." Izuku and Inko watched with interest. "He has a powerful quirk, but we have no idea what it is or what it does other than consume the oxygen reserves in his body." Inko looked at Izuku, who was becoming nervous, and asked worriedly, "Is that a bad thing, doctor?" However, the doctor's smile turned the tide. "No, ma'am, it just means we'll have to wait for Izuku's quirk to show itself before we can gather more data. We know it is there, but we have no idea what it is, so we are forced to wait for his quirk to manifest. So, when his quirk does manifest, please bring him back so we can see if he needs anything to help him in his day-to-day life. That's all the information I have for you." At what the doctor said, Izuku felt a great sense of relief. He was excited because he would be the first to experience his quirk, even though he had no idea what it was. After filling out some paperwork and thanking the doctor, Inko left the office, leaving Izuku to run around trying different ways to activate a quirk. Izuku was nervously attempting to awaken something inside of him on the drive home. He was eager to find out what his peculiarity was, but Inko had to stop it before it became unmanageable. Now, Izuku, don't practice in the car. We have to wait for your quirk to show itself. And that may take time, but it should be soon, so be patient." Izuku, who was trying to relax, complied and was grinning broadly. He wanted to watch hero videos once he got home. After All Might made his debut in Japan, Inko was happy to play Izuku's favorite video of him saving people. Izuku started to feel warm and exhausted after watching All Might videos for a while. It was almost as if his excitement was draining his vitality. Since Izuku typically has more energy than this, he thought it was unusual that his enthusiasm was accompanied by exhaustion. Izuku, however, was exhausted and oddly felt his body warming up, but he attributed this to body heat. Izuku had a dream about the greatest hero ever as he slept. Sadly for Izuku and Inko, the dream swiftly turned into a nightmare and was filled with a wide range of emotions, primarily sadness and rage. When Inko noticed how exhausted her son was, she smiled and put him to bed. However, she was worried because Izuku didn't appear to be having a pleasant dream. Inko decided to give Izuku a kiss on the forehead to lift his spirits, and after saying goodnight and kissing Izuku on the forehead, she left his room. After phoning Mitsuki and discussing their doctor's appointment and other unrelated subjects, Inko, who was already exhausted, went to get ready for bed. After witnessing her son's happiness, nothing could spoil this day for her. However, nightmare memories had to be made before any pleasant ones could be created. Since there was no moon and it was midnight, the street was completely dark. Izuku was sweating and breathing heavily while he slept soundly in his bed. He felt warm beneath his bed linens and scrunched his face. Every now and then, Izuku would smell something and be startled out of his nightmare. Izuku would open his eyes groggily and rub the sleep from them, only to be hit by that smell once more. Izuku opened his eyes wide and froze like a deer caught in headlights. Prior to Izuku, his Ruma was entirely consumed by a fierce, black flame. Izuku felt a surge of terror and fear throughout his body. In a panic, Izuku threw off his burning covers and fled his room. As the scene in front of him filled him with even more fear, time seemed to slow down. Izuku saw the whole house turn to ash as it was consumed by black flames. Izuku cried out in fear and anxiety, "Mom, Mom, where are you? I'm scared," as he searched frantically through the black flames for his mother. But with the house engulfed in flames, Izuku was unable to move very far. Izuku soon started sobbing loudly, which increased the intensity of the flames. The heat surrounding him grew so intense that he was forced to his knees as he raised his hands to his face in an attempt to hide from the terror. As Izuku saw his arms being consumed by the black flames, his distress increased. "Ah ag!" Izuku tore his arms from his face and waved his hands frantically to extinguish the fire, but it persisted and only grew hotter. Tears streamed down Izuku's face as he screamed in horror, compelled to watch the flames burn fiercely, even beginning to burn him. "Ah!" Izuku screamed in complete fear and panic, and he started searching for his mother in a panic, tears streaming from his eyes. Running to Inko's room, he slammed the burning door open with such force that it fell from its hinges. Izuku was terrified when he first walked into the room, but as soon as he saw Inko, he froze and felt his body chill. He saw his mother in bed, terrified of the flames, staring at the ferocious black flames with terrified, panicked eyes. Izuku had his arms burning when Inko hurried to where her door was. She looked at Izuku and her face immediately took on a horrified expression. When Inko noticed that Izuku was frightened, she hurried out of bed and snatched up the covers to put her son to sleep, but the house collapsed at the worst possible moment. Izuku watched helplessly as the roof collapsed, paralyzed with terror and terror. As Izuku watched the debris fall on Inko, trapping her and causing her to scream in agony, time seemed to slow down. Izuku's arms were still burning when he jolted out of his terrified daze and rushed forward to try to save Inko. Oddly enough, though, Izuku's arms no longer burned as before. But as they devoured everything and reduced it to ash, the fires around him flared and burned even more fiercely and intensely. Izuku cried out, "Mom, Mom," as he attempted to move the heavy debris away from Inko, but it would not budge. The flames on his arms only intensified as he was powerless to assist Inko. Inko looked at the terrified and desperate Izuku and yelled, "Izuku, stop! You need to get out of here, go!" "No Mom, I can't, Izuku." Izuku looked up, his eyes watering desperately, and when he leveled his eyes with his mother's, he saw that she was also crying, but she smiled at him. Inko pulled Izuku over by grabbing his head and kissing his forehead out of love. Izuku was startled and looked down at Inko, who was crying and wearing a terrified expression. However, she held his cheek and smiled at him. Izuku was warmed by her touch, even though there were fires all around them. "Izuku, go. I love you, so go." Inko pushed Izuku away just in time, without thinking. At that point, the roof began to collapse further, crushing Inko and trapping him beneath more rubble. Izuku's body shivered with horror and fear as he stared in horror. No. Izuku considered a quirk after noticing his arms. Flames spontaneously erupted from the palms of his hands as he pointed his arms forward. Izuku's whole body was consumed by black fire as soon as the flames started, and he was afraid of them. Izuku was constantly frightened and anxious. The force of the flames emanating from Izuku's arms was sufficient to propel him through a window and out of the room. Izuku last saw his mother when the ceiling completely collapsed. Izuku reached his hand out as he fell through the air, tears of fear and agony streaming down his face and floating in midair before instantly vanishing under the heat of the black fire. Izuku rolled onto the street, still burning, and when he looked up, he saw his house was engulfed in black flames. The flames on Izuku's body grew taller and burned more fiercely as more tears began to well up. Izuku, feeling helpless and defeated, slammed his hands down, took a deep breath, and let out a bone-chilling scream into the night. After neighbors reported the fire, The fire department finally arrived as Izuku sobbed. They would have arrived sooner, but nobody noticed for a long time because the flames were black. The sight of a house on fire and a small boy sobbing while burning in the middle of the road horrified the firefighters when they arrived. They moved quickly, grabbed some water, and sprayed Izuku with it. However, the fire persisted even after the water instantly evaporated. With his hands over his eyes, Izuku let out a louder cry as the flames surrounding his body intensified. Alongside Izuku's fear and agonized screams, the firefighters seized their hoses and started trying to extinguish the fire on the boy in the house as smoke billowed into the night sky. The hero Eraserhead, also known as Shota Aizawa, was having a slow night, which he disliked because, typically, his luck would indicate that something negative would occur. He was enjoying some much-needed coffee while perched atop a building and keeping an eye on the street below to see if there was any trouble. However, the slight smell of smoke, which was out of the ordinary for the city, reached Aizawa's nostrils. But since it seemed distant, Aizawa decided to ignore it. Later, he smelled it again and found it to be stronger, but when he looked around, he saw nothing. Not even the usual mixture of smoke and light that accompanied fires was visible to him. Aizawa believed there was more to this, so he put down his coffee and started jumping from rooftop to rooftop, following the smoke's scent as quickly as he could. He leapt to the street after realizing he was making no progress. Aizawa started running to catch up with the smoke odor. He was startled to see an apartment complex engulfed in black flames down the street as soon as he turned a corner. Aizawa rushed over and saw that two teams of firefighters were there, one caring for a screaming boy who was on fire and the other for the building to prevent the fire from spreading further. Aizawa ran over to the boy, worried that he might be able to help. However, Aizawa saw that the boy was not being extinguished even after the firefighters used blankets, water, extinguishers, repellents, and everything else they had on hand as he hurried over to help. Assuming it was a quirk, Aizawa used his eraser quirk, which caused the sobbing boy to magically cease being engulfed in flames. After a moment of shock, the firefighters saw Aizawa rush to the boy with the green hair who was crying. Aizawa wondered where his parents were when he noticed that no one approached the boy. "It's okay, kid. Where are your parents?" Izuku was sobbing and unable to think clearly. Until he felt a hand on his shoulder, he kept crying. The flames had gone when he opened his eyes, and a strange man was staring at him with worried eyes. After Izuku calmed down, Aizawa repeated, "You're going to be just fine. Now, where are your parents?" However, Izuku's eyes began to well up with tears, and he weakly raised his hand, which was shaking, and pointed at the building. As Izuku watched in wonder, Aizawa's eyes opened as he realized what Izuku was telling him, and he immediately ran to the building. Aizawa hurried to the apartment by scaling the fire escape. The firefighters told Aizawa to stop and attempted to prevent him from entering the apartment, but he broke down the door using his scarf as a mask. Aizawa ran in and saw that everything was covered in the black flame, which was so hot that it was reducing everything to ash. Additionally, because the flames were black, Aizawa's vision was impaired, making it more difficult to navigate the apartment. However, after searching and repeatedly holding his breath in the hot, dry air, Aizawa finally found a pile of debris. Sensing that something was wrong with this pile, Aizawa hurried over to the debris and started removing pieces as fast as he could. Aizawa saw a woman's arm after clearing some debris, but it was lifeless. Aizawa was appalled and dug her out more quickly than before, but after he removed her upper body, he was defeated. She had passed away. She had been killed by crushing. Aizawa was examining the body with a distressed and bereaved expression when he noticed that she was holding something to her chest and had a ring on her finger, which he removed. Aizawa picked it up and saw that it was a half-burned picture of her and her son grinning broadly. As the walls collapsed in on themselves, Aizawa looked down, feeling miserable, snatched up the picture, and felt a deep sense of regret that he had been unable to save her and had to leave her. Coughing violently, Aizawa barely managed to leave the apartment before being seized by a firefighter and taken to an EMT. When the police arrived, they started erecting a barrier for the curious onlookers, whose faces were filled with shock and fear, as they watched an apartment burn in a black flame. Sitting in an ambulance, Aizawa looked around and noticed the boy with the green hair that now had black highlights. In defiance of the EMT's request, Aizawa got up and approached Izuku, who was sobbing and balled up in a ball with a blanket over him for solace. Izuku didn't look up, so Aizawa sat down beside him without saying anything and just put his arm around him. Aizawa had no idea that Izuku would see him smoky, grab hold of him, and sob into his shirt. Instead of stopping him, Aizawa gave Izuku a squeeze in an attempt to console him during his distress. Aizawa held out his hand with the ring and half-burned photo without saying anything. Izuku stared at what Aizawa was holding and slowly took them. However, as he started to cry more, Aizawa simply patted his back and held him in silence. Aizawa soon heard someone in the crowd shouting at the police, and when she turned to look, she saw a tall, busty, ash-blonde woman with spiky hair shouting at them. She pushed against the officers with unexpected strength, making it difficult for them to keep her still and in one spot. "What the fuck do you mean I can't get through? I fucking know who lives in that house. Let me through now or I will ram my foot up your ass." The intimidating woman clearly shook the police, and Aizawa wondered who she was. Then, as he watched Mitsuki attempt to get past the police line, he heard Izuku say softly, "Auntie." Then, with tears in her eyes, Mitsuki raced over to Izuku, forced her way through the police barrier, and locked eyes with her. When she got to Izuku, she knelt down and gave him a firm embrace. When the police arrived to arrest her, Aizawa gave them a fierce look, and they withdrew. Mitsuki's face was filled with shock and sadness as Izuku began to cry once more at the mention of his mother. "Oh, Izuku baby. I am so glad you're safe. Where's Inko?" She brought Izuku in for a tender embrace that contained all the emotion she wished to convey after realizing what had happened after seeing the ring and burned picture in his hands. Knowing that this would be terrible for both him and the boy, Aizawa simply sighed as he watched the scene. However, Aizawa was in a miserable mood because he wished he had arrived sooner, because if I did, then this boy would still have a mother. The firefighters started searching through the remains for anything after the fire was extinguished. However, nothing could be saved because everything was reduced to ash or charcoal by the black flames. This fire, which burned so hot and fierce that it destroyed everything, was unlike any they had ever seen. However, the burned body of Inko Midoriya was discovered by the firefighters and given to the EMTs, who removed it. In order to obtain statements, Izuku and Aizawa were placed in a police vehicle and driven to the police station. Aizawa agreed when Mitsuki told the pro-hero she would be there later and asked him to watch Izuku until she got there before they left. Izuku and Aizawa were shown to a room in the rear of the precinct. Izuku sat down and curled up into a ball, turning into a dejected, shocked child. Aizawa got him some water because he hadn't said anything and he appeared dehydrated from all the crying. During their quiet time together, Aizawa did his best to console Izuku. Until Izuku asked Aizawa a question in a raspy voice and with raw eyes. It was silent and wretched. "Who are you, mister?" Aizawa asked, her face sad as she gazed down at Izuku. Aizawa's mind instantly came up with a response, but he didn't like it because it seemed false. "I'm a hero kid. My name is Eraserhead. Don't worry, you're safe now." Despite his sadness, Izuku was grateful that a hero had attempted to save his mother, and he could tell that Aizawa felt bad about not being able to do so. The door then opened, and both boys looked up to see a detective with a folder in his hand. The detective cleared his throat and took a seat in the chair across from them. "Hello. My name is Detective Naomasa. I hope you will allow me to ask some questions so I can collect a statement." At one point, Naomasa sat down and noticed Izuku's sad face and Aizawa's worried one. To let Naomasa know they were paying attention, they both moved in their chairs. "Firstly, how did the fire start?" Izuku winced at that, and since he could see the depression deepening, Aizawa responded on his behalf. When he finished, Aizawa saw how young Izuku was and decided to add more to his explanation. "I believe his quirk did it. When I got to the scene, intense black flames engulfed the house and the boy, but he was unaffected by them. The firefighters tried to put him out, but the fire would not go out till I used my quirk on him. Judging by his reaction, this must be his first time using his quirk, and given the time, it most likely happened as he slept." Naomasa paused before posing his next query after writing down the details on paper. Aizawa froze at the question, unsure of how to respond. "I see. Then was this a conscious decision, or was it accidental?" "I can't answer that," Aizawa said, regretfully looking down. Even though Naomasa really didn't want to ask a child these questions, he had to know because of his job so that he could assist. Naomasa pushed his guilt aside and steeled himself as he gazed softly at Izuku. "It's okay, kid, we just want to know. Nothing bad will happen, so please can you help us?" Sitting quietly and gazing down, Izuku was obviously disturbed and depressed. However, as Izuku's tears started to flow again, both adults heard him sob and covered his face with his hands. Additionally, Izuku's voice was exhausted from crying. Izuku was sobbing uncontrollably once more when he said, "It was all my fault. My quirk Akilata my moma I hadia my quirk." Aizawa did his best to console him by massaging his back. However, Aizawa lacked experience in providing emotional support, so he was ill-equipped to console a child who had just witnessed his mother's death. However, no one realized how much more tragic it was for Aizawa. He detested seeing someone hate a characteristic of themselves, and it was even more painful to witness a child who would typically embrace and love their quirk openly despise it. Knowing that this child would likely grow up to despise himself and shun others out of fear of doing something wrong or hurting them made Aizawa sad. As Mitsuki, Masaru, and Katsuki would storm into the room and push the policeman who led them to the side, Aizawa would regrettably be unable to give it any more thought. As Katsuki stared at the wall, looking dejected and broken, the parents hurried over to give Izuku a tight hug. Mitsuki gave Izuku a gentle yet affectionate hug. Mitsuki threw a fist at Naomasa, who was shocked to learn that she wasn't lying. "Oh, Izuku, we're so glad you're okay. These men didn't do anything to you, did they? Because if they did, I will personally kick their asses," Mitsuki said. Masaru, however, soothed her. "Mitsuki, now is not the time for this. We need to get everything sorted out and be here for Izuku." All of the Bakugos turned to face Naomasa, who was looking at them with a perplexed eyebrow. "Right, sorry, so tell us what happened." Naomasa was about to have them escorted out, but Aizawa stood in for them. "Sorry, I can't disclose any information to people not related to this." Naomasa raised an eyebrow and turned to Mitsuki to explain. "Actually, they are related. I heard Izuku call her auntie, and they appeared to be fairly close." Naomasa sighed in exasperation before bracing himself for the surprising revelation he was about to deliver. "We're longtime family friends. I knew his mom for many years. Izuku is practically my son at this point. So please tell us what happened." As he got ready to explain what had happened, he gestured for the family to sit in the remaining chairs. In the middle of the night, a fire broke out at the Midoriya residence. The flames were black and extremely intense, which made identifying the fire difficult. Thankfully, firefighters were able to put the flames in the house out before they could spread to other apartments. But the question of how they started was just answered. Izuku's quirk had manifested itself and started the fire while he slept. He didn't want to start the fire, it just happened. Izuku began to cry again as she sank into the chair and tried to hide, and all of the Bakugos turned to watch. Sitting there, Aizawa gave Izuku a shoulder pat. There was nothing the Bakugos could do. As they watched Izuku sob and attempt to hide, nobody moved, but Mitsuki approached the sobbing Izuku and held his hands while he attempted to pull them away. Izuku cried frantically and said, "No, go away, auntie. I don't want to hurt you either." Ignoring his cries, Mitsuki simply held his hands and smiled gently at Izuku before moving closer to him. Mitsuki then pulled Izuku into an embrace, and Izuku sobbed into her shoulder as he put his arms around her. "I know you won't hurt me, Izuku. You're a kind soul with a bright smile, so I know you don't want to hurt me." After realizing what Izuku had done, Katsuki just stared at the ground without saying anything, while Masaru approached and patted Izuku's head and back. After Izuku calmed down a little, Mitsuki paused her embrace and turned to face Naomasa. As he gave Izuku a back rub and gave him to Masaru. What will happen to Izuku after all this? Naomasa considered telling her after examining his case folder, but he decided there was no harm in doing so. Aizawa and Naomasa noticed Mitsuki's slight wince and turned to Izuku. "He'll probably go live with a family member if we can get in contact with them, like his father. Izuku baby, can you and Katsuki go wait outside while I and Masaru talk to the officer for a bit?" Izuku nodded as he rose to go, and Katsuki got up without saying anything, approached Izuku, took his hand, and walked out of the room, staring at the floor. Thankful that Katsuki was able to think clearly enough to assist, Mitsuki returned her attention to Naomasa. To give the boys some leftover donuts, an officer accompanied them to the break area. Mitsuki began, "Now that the boys are gone, let's talk about Izuku's living situation. I don't think giving him to his father is a great idea." Naomasa gave her a questioning look and used his peculiarity to elicit honest responses, which he also recorded on paper. "Why is that?" "Well, Izuku's father abandoned Inko and Izuku when he was just a baby. Inko just told Izuku he was working abroad in America to not stress him out, but it was a lie. I'm sure you can find court documents proving he relinquished parental control of Izuku." Aizawa listened to the discussion with interest, and Naomasa nodded in comprehension and noted the details. He would offer Izuku the opportunity to join him live if necessary. He was so generous to those who were less fortunate because he believed that no one should have to grow up without parents. While Mitsuki awaited their response, Naomasa considered this. So, Masaru and I are offering for Izuku to come and stay with us instead of being in foster care or some adoption program. Well, the boy does trust you, and he knows you well enough to call you auntie. But it would be a bit more complicated than just letting him go with you since you are not family. If you want to take him, then you would need to file yourselves for foster care while we register Izuku for foster care. Then we can recommend that Izuku stay with you while he participates in the program. If we start immediately, the station can rush the documents into their system to speed up the process, but you must commit to taking Izuku in. Both parents said simultaneously and without hesitation, "We'll do it." Foster care would likely exacerbate Izuku's terrible feelings, which they would never allow to happen again. Alright, I'll call in our station lawyer. You can trust them to help speed up this process. I will also get in contact with the foster program workers to begin registering Izuku. Also, I am not a doctor, but the station EMT recommends some therapy for Izuku. There is no doubt in my mind that he is traumatized by this. We can recommend a child psychologist or therapist for him if you want. Masaru wrote down their choices and Mitsuki listened attentively. Thank you for your help, officer, but when will we be able to take Izuku home with us tonight? Since there is currently no one for him to stay with, we have no choice but to let you have him for 24 hours. By that time, though, the legal stuff about foster care should have been dealt with, so you should be able to keep him. But we'll keep you informed of the situation as it progresses. After thanking Naomasa, the parents went to pick up Katsuki and Izuku. Given that Katsuki was typically a noisy child, the parents were concerned when both boys remained silent. Naomasa was still in the room with Aizawa when they left the precinct to go to the Bakugo residence after picking up the boys. Naomasa said, "Well, this is a shitty situation," to defuse the situation. Aizawa retorted, "I can't imagine how that boy must feel right now." "Yeah, I don't think anyone can. I know he did not mean to kill his mother with his quirk, and I don't blame him for anything. But kids won't see it that way, and he certainly doesn't see it that way." As he considered the situation, Aizawa said from experience, "The guilt will tear him apart. There must be something we can do about this. Little kids are ruthless when it comes to this kind of stuff. You know as well as I do, Eraser. All we can do is provide technical and legal support. Emotional therapy and comfort aren't what we do, even if it feels like the completely wrong move to make. I should give them my number so they can call me to support him. I can help the kid deal with this since I was there, so I can at least offer some closure. Maybe, but they may not take it since they all seem depressed. I hate to do this, but I have to go and deal with other work. Good night and good luck, Eraser." Aizawa was left alone in the room to feel bad about not being able to assist the child who had just entered when Naomasa got up and gathered his files before leaving. Aizawa sighed and made the decision to head home for the evening. After all, Aizawa could relax with some video games and some cats. Izuku would hardly sleep that night because he was still thinking about what had happened. He cried himself to sleep as he replayed the terrifying events in his mind. Neither he nor his parents had spoken to Katsuki since they returned home. Izuku, however, was angry at himself and no one else as he was drifting off to sleep. Izuku was upset that he lacked the strength to keep his mother safe. He killed his mother because he was unable to save her, and he hated himself for that. All he wanted was to curl up in a ball and forget about everything. Time travel would allow Izuku to go back in time and prevent this from ever happening. Izuku's mind was heavy with guilt and anger, which caused a lump to form in his throat and caused him to cry bitterly. Izuku vowed to himself that evening, his villainous quirk would never be used again. Izuku woke up the following day feeling numb. He seemed almost incapable of feeling anything. Izuku, after all, had killed his mother, so he had no idea how to feel. When Mitsuki entered the room and saw Izuku's sad expression, her heart ached because she knew that Izuku was a happy child. Izuku was deeply affected by Inko's tragic death, especially since it was caused by his quirk manifesting. In order to prevent things from getting worse, Mitsuki had to get Izuku in contact with a therapist right away. Unfortunately, Mitsuki had to send Izuku off to school after gathering some of Katsuki's clothes for him to wear and packing a fresh bag of schoolwork and supplies for Izuku. She made appointments for him with the foster care office, a therapist, the police, and a quirk doctor as Izuku and Katsuki were leaving. Izuku and Bakugo strolled alongside each other, both of them depressed over Inko's passing. When the pair arrived at school, the teachers noticed them and were wary of Izuku because rumors spread quickly. Ignoring the teachers, the two boys went to the classroom and took their seats. Izuku made every effort to conceal himself from the numerous eyes that were on him, but he was not very successful. Bakugo observed the various looks Izuku received, but he remained silent and simply sat next to him, gazing down with melancholy. But soon after, other children entered, and upon seeing Izuku, their voices ceased. Bakugo could see their thoughts clearly. "See, it's the bad guy." A teacher then entered to start the day for the children after they had all quietly taken their seats. When lunchtime arrived a few hours later, Izuku decided to simply sit at his desk and eat in silence and slowly without expressing any emotion. Despite being invited to join the other children at their tables, Bakugo chose to remain with Izuku and sat next to him, doing the same thing. Even though Bakugo was noisy and impolite, he wasn't stupid, so when he saw Izuku in pain, he decided to stay there even though he didn't know why. Bakugo, on the other hand, believed that staying close to his best friend was the right decision. And as a group of boys approached where they were sitting, Bakugo found an answer to the question of his loyalty. "Hey, Bakugo, why don't you come and sit with us, away from the villain?" Izuku clearly reacted to those words, and he made an effort to take a deep breath and remain composed in the face of being labeled a villain. But no matter how hard he tried, Izuku's mental armor was beginning to show cracks. As the boys persisted in taunting Izuku, Bakugo stopped eating. "Why are you even sitting next to Bakugo? You're a villain, and he's a hero. Heroes don't talk to villains. Heroes save people while villains kill people." Izuku was now beginning to cry at being labeled a villain due to his peculiarity in the events of the previous evening. His fists were trembling with anger at himself and the fact that they were most likely correct. Then, however, a remarkable event occurred. Everyone's attention was drawn to the class when a loud explosion erupted. When they all looked up, Bakugo was enraged and his hands were exploding in miniature. He was glaring down at the boys from where he stood on the table. "Shut up. Izuku is not a villain," Bakugo went on because he felt the need to make a point after obviously intimidating the boys. "Izuku has done nothing wrong. You're the wrong one, stupid extras. The Izuku I know would never kill another person, so shut up." The boys were shocked by Bakugo's boldness, but now they were upset, and Bakugo became their target, lowering himself to their level. "Why are you defending the villain? He burned his house down and killed his mom, and he'll probably kill the rest of us." I said, "Shut up." Thinking out of anger, Bakugo punched the other boy in the stomach, adding force to the blow with his quirk. Bakugo got into a fight with the other students in the center of the classroom after the boy fell back. Izuku watched the entire incident with tears in his eyes as Bakugo and 4 boys got into a fight that the teachers had to break up. "Kachan doesn't believe I'm a bad guy. However, I am. Why, then, am I feeling so relieved? I ought to be upset with myself. He ought to hate me." Izuku was unsure of how to react to the situation and simply curled into a ball, covering his face as Bakugo beat up the other children while he was being beaten. "Kachan should have no reason to want to interact with me." Mitsuki thought it would be better if the boys weren't at school at the moment, so she had to come and get them both soon. While driving home, she glanced back, worried about the 2 of them, but then she thought of a way to help Izuku begin to heal from his trauma. Mitsuki discovered an old necklace that no longer fit her when they arrived at the house and went upstairs to her jewelry box. She then entered the room where Katsuki and Izuku shared a room, located Inko's ring, attached it to the necklace, and proceeded to locate Izuku. As Katsuki went to the couch and switched on some cartoons while listening to Izuku's conversation, Izuku followed Mitsuki into the kitchen and said, "Hey, Izuku baby, come here. I have something for you." Izuku looked down with guilt when Mitsuki held out a necklace with Inko's ring on it, but Mitsuki put it in his hand and gave him a hug. "Listen, Izuku, I want you to have this. I want you to know that Inko loved you deeply, she always has. You were her greatest pride, and I know she would want you to have a piece of her with you wherever you go so that you don't forget that love. So, take her ring and wear it to remember her." Mitsuki took the necklace and placed it on Izuku, who sobbed into her shoulder for a while as she started to cry. Izuku felt he didn't deserve that love and that he would never experience it again after Mitsuki gave him a hug that was full of a mother's love. Izuku went to watch cartoons with Katsuki after he stopped crying. Bakugo was sitting on the couch, watching TV with a frown on his face, but every now and then he would glance at Izuku. Izuku would occasionally ask a question, but otherwise they were quiet. Bakugo raised an eyebrow at Izuku's refusal to call him Kachan and scoffed before responding. "Bakugo back in the classroom. Did you mean what you said?" Still watching cartoons, he said in a nasty tone, "Of course, I did. Why say something in the first place if you're not going to mean it?" But he was starting to worry about his best friend. Izuku was beginning to isolate himself, and Bakugo could tell, and he didn't like it. Izuku said, half crying, "So, you don't think I'm a villain?" Bakugo laughed even harder. Only stupid bad people are villains, and I know you're not bad, just stupid, so why would that make you a villain? Izuku, on the edge of tears from extreme guilt, said, thanks, with a faintly relieved smile. Mitsuki grinned as she listened to Katsuki's remarks. Mitsuki was aware that her son was a nasty jerk, but she also knew that he wasn't as horrible as he made out. Since they had always been together, Bakugo had a deep affection for Izuku, and she was relieved that he did not hold Izuku responsible for Inko's untimely demise. Since Katsuki didn't reject him outright, Mitsuki was actually relieved. Bakugo wouldn't desert his friend in such a manner, so it would be simpler to adopt Izuku and welcome him into the family. Knowing that Izuku would eventually have their support and that his life would go on without incident, Mitsuki grinned. She was concerned, though, that Izuku might not think so. Mitsuki sighed and wished she could support Izuku the way Inko would. I'll take good care of them both, so don't worry, Inko. Izuku would actually go to sleep that night feeling somewhat better about himself, but also feeling worse. Izuku, however, kept his word and intended to do so until the end of his life. His quirk would never again cause harm to another person. When morning arrived, Mitsuki decided it would be best to keep Izuku at home and send Bakugo to school. In addition to meeting with his foster care staff to get his paperwork taken care of, Izuku had to visit the quirk doctor. They went to get Izuku fully registered for foster care as their first step, and as soon as he was processed, they applied to take him in. Izuku was briefly removed to go and complete the paperwork after being inserted into the system. Masaru and Mitsuki were seated in the waiting room, awaiting approval to foster Izuku respectively. While they waited, Mitsuki heard the doors of the building open and turned to see a tall, robust man with blue eyes and red hair. A slender woman with long white hair who looked depressed was next to him. She had 4 children, each of whom had a different color of hair. The tallest boy had all red hair, the girl had red and white patches in her hair, the boy had all white hair, and the youngest, who was a girl, had all half of the colors. When Mitsuki saw the family, she was amazed that the 2 parents had 4 children together, but she was also struck by how the mother appeared both sad and a little excited about something. She then overheard the couple speaking to one another in an obviously hostile manner. The man, who was obviously angry and didn't want to be at the foster care offices, said, "Are you sure this is what you want? Why bother going through this whole process when I can just give you another kid?" Rei forced a smile, but her true desire was to raise a child who would return her love and who didn't look like her husband, Enji. "Yes, this is what I want, because that way I can raise a kid that won't have any bad influences." Enji turned to the office worker and spoke after saying, "Fine," with a hint of rage. The employee smiled slightly and took out some files before saying, "We are the Todoroki family. Our applications were approved and now we're here to see if there are any children to foster." Enji didn't care, but Rei was discouraged when the Todoroki family looked through the files and found nothing of interest. A worker emerged carrying Izuku's completed file as they were putting the final file away. Rei became interested in the file and requested to see it. "Hey, I have the finished file of Izuku Midoriya." After giving Rei a quick glance, the office worker said, "May I see that file?" and gave it to her. After witnessing the entire exchange, Mitsuki became irate at the idea of someone looking through Izuku's file. Rei was instantly shocked to see Izuku's photo when she opened the file. His sad and numb appearance made her heart hurt to see him in such misery. However, she also fell in love with Izuku's freckles and his black and green hair. As she read on, she discovered that he was in the foster system because his father didn't want to be involved with him and he had lost his mother. Rei felt pity and sympathy for Izuku, and then she noticed the one thing that gave her the ability to decide. It was stated that Izuku had an unnamed fire quirk. Rei grinned and glanced at the employees, knowing instantly that she wanted Izuku. Both employees froze and gazed at Rei, who hoped she could raise Izuku. "Can we foster Izuku?" they asked. When Enji saw the file Rei was holding, he too froze, wondering why she was attempting to foster a child who appeared so emotionally detached. When a family attempted to take her nephew away from her, Mitsuki was rendered speechless and her blood began to boil. As Mitsuki attempted to vent her annoyance on them, Masaru was preventing her from doing so. Fortunately, a worker received a police notification. Rei's face trembled and became dejected as she realized she couldn't raise Izuku. "Oh, I'm sorry, but it looks like the police recommended that Izuku be placed with another family. I can see what other files there are and show them to you if you'd like." She was feeling depressed once more, and Mitsuki noticed that she was wearing a pained expression. Rei's shoulders drooped as she turned to go, saying, "And no, that's fine, I think we looked long enough today. We should go home." Even though Enji looked at her bewildered, her children followed suit. After attempting to foster Izuku, the family abruptly left, shocking Mitsuki. They seemed like good people, or at least the mother did, and she wasn't sure what to think. Mitsuki felt a twinge of sympathy and hoped the mother would eventually find what she was searching for. However, Mitsuki was aware that as long as she lived, she would always remember the name Todoroki. Izuku was taken out after the family had departed, and the remaining foster paperwork was completed. The Bakugos were now formally adopting Izuku, and Mitsuki was somewhat relieved that Izuku would be under her supervision. The case regarding the house fire was then closed after they all went to the police station and made their statements. In addition to providing them with the therapist's contact details, Naomasa expressed his happiness that Izuku is doing well, despite his lack of a smile. When Izuku, Masaru, and Mitsuki later visited the quirk doctor, Mitsuki informed the physician that Izuku had been depressed about his quirk and advised him not to investigate further. The physician comprehended, performed the tests, and returned with the findings. Okay, Mrs. Bakugo. Izuku here has fully developed his quirk, and it is an emitter fire type. The fuel for his flames comes from the oxygen in his blood, and the results show that his oxygen usage is incredibly efficient. But if he uses too much oxygen, then he runs the risk of getting brain damage and suffering from hypoxia from a lack of oxygen in the blood and brain. So be careful when using your quirk, and if it gets worse in the future, then I recommend some cardio exercise to help increase lung capacity to aid in the blood oxygen levels. Is that it, doctor, or is there more? Mitsuki nodded at the doctor, looking at Izuku and wondering how powerful he could be when he grows up. There is more. The flames Izuku has should be pretty versatile based on the foundation of his quirk factor. If family history is taken into account, then Izuku should have some pretty advanced pyromancy skills. But without actually observing the quirk in action, all we can do is speculate on his abilities and latent potential. The doctor opened a registry database on his computer and nodded, saying, I see, thank you, doctor, is there anything else? Yes, there is one last thing. Izuku needs to name his quirk so we can add it to the quirk registry. They all looked down at the dejected boy as he considered his unusual moniker for a while. Oh right, I forgot, so Izuku, do you have a name in mind? They asked. As they all spoke to him, Izuku's emotions were numbing and he was unsure of what to call his quirk, but he continued to feel angry at himself and used that as a way to think. Perhaps, Nightmare Flare, or Midnight Inferno, would serve as a reminder to never use it. No, those are dumb. The phrase, Wretched Firestorm, sounds nice. Izuku was about to say the name he had decided on when he was reminded of Inko by the ring and necklace around his neck. Izuku froze, remembering Inko's big smile and all the times she had given him a hug. Izuku's eyes began to well up with tiny tears as he thought of Inko. But Izuku had a problem, and Inko's memory provided the solution. Izuku took a deep breath and steeled himself, knowing that Inko would not want him to ruin his life in that way. Izuku therefore complied with her late and unspoken request by sticking to something simple. With a tiny tear in his eye, Izuku looked up at all the adults, hardened his face, and announced the name he was considering. I'll call my quirk, Black Blaze, Beep. Izuku moaned as he woke up for the day, his alarm blaring in his ear at the crack of dawn. When he groggily awoke, he discovered that his alarm clock read 5 a.m. Izuku sighed as he noticed that the sun had already set and it was still dark outside. No one was on the street, and not even a bird could be heard chirping. Fucking Katsuki, forcing me to follow his stupid ass for his daily workout. I'm not the one who's aiming to be a fucking hero. Izuku attempted to return to his bed, but he was unable to see the person behind him who angrily threw him out. Izuku was kicked quickly but forcefully to the ground, and rather than standing up, he simply sighed and closed his eyes once more. One person simply approached him and knelt down to his level. Wake the fuck up, nerd. Can't you just let me sleep for once in my goddamn life, Katsuki? No. Izuku took a surprise punch to the stomach after Bakugo shouted into his ear, and he fell back to cope with the pain. Bakugo looked up to see an exhausted Izuku standing there, his fist outstretched, the sleep rubbing from his eyes. Izuku smiled and said, well, look at that. I'm up now, thanks for the boost, Katsuki. With a grunt, Bakugo snatched up Izuku's training attire and hurled it at him. Izuku caught the garments with his face, knocking his head back. Now that you're up, meet downstairs so we can go on a run and stretch Izuku. After removing his clothing, Izuku turned to Bakugo and asked him, what's with the nickname? You haven't called me that since we were like 4. It's always been Mido or Nerd. Before leaving, Bakugo gave Izuku a sly smile and said, well, we're older now, loser. I can call you whatever I want. And besides, it's a special occasion today. Izuku simply grunted as he got completely awake and changed into his workout attire. With Inko's ring in hand, Izuku also took his chain and fastened it around his neck. Izuku outgrew the necklace, so he upgraded it from a basic thin necklace to a small chain. Izuku went to the bathroom to freshen up after gathering all of his belongings. Izuku looked at himself in the mirror after splattering some water on his face. Izuku developed over the last 10 years into a cruel yet falsely compassionate individual. If someone was fortunate, they might occasionally witness Izuku assisting those in need. However, Izuku also had a short fuse and a hot temper, which led to him constantly frowning and getting into a lot of fights. Despite being a delinquent, Izuku never lost sight of the importance of showing kindness to those who deserved it. That was ensured by Inko, and Mitsuki merely hammered it home. But Izuku's look has changed significantly. Izuku has grown larger and stronger ever since Bakugo began dragging him outside the house to go run and work out with him. Izuku's muscles were well defined, and when paired with his scowl, he always had an intimidatingly angry expression. Although Izuku's hair was primarily forest green, there were noticeable black strands mixed in to give the impression that he had had some of it dyed black, even though it was actually his natural color. Izuku put an end to his introspection and carried on preparing for the morning. Izuku went downstairs and put on some loose-fitting sweatpants and a form-fitting tank top. Izuku saw that everyone was in the living room. On the couch and lounge chair, Mitsuki, Masaru, and even Katsuki were waiting for him. Izuku was extremely perplexed by this action and pondered what was happening because of the tense atmosphere. What is happening here? You two don't usually wake up this early. Izuku obeyed and sat in front of everyone when Mitsuki said, "Izuku, sit down. There's something we need to tell you." This was strange for her because Mitsuki didn't give an order. He regarded them all with suspicion and pondered the reason behind this. As Izuku prepared to speak, Mitsuki straightened her posture and fixed her gaze on her. Izuku squinted at her, attempting to deduce the direction of the conversation. "Now Izuku, you know you're in the foster care program, right?" he asked. Izuku dismissed the matter, but Mitsuki sighed and went on, "It's kind of hard to not know when every 3 months they send someone to do a wellness check on me." "Right, you are always a smartass, but you will not be in the foster care program anymore, instead." What? What the fuck? Why? Izuku, who didn't want to believe what he had just heard, opened his eyes to see that Mitsuki had been truthful and forthright. And Izuku was upset that neither Masaru nor Mitsuki denied it. As Izuku got up to look at them, Masaru begged, "Calm down, Izuku. You'll wake the neighbors." Mitsuki would have responded, "Fuck the neighbors, I want to know why, right now." But Katsuki outstripped them. "See, I told you it would fucking backfire, hag," Bakugo shouted, frowning and crossing his arms. "Shut it, dumb brat, I'm not finished with Izuku." Izuku watched bewildered. Masaru had his head in his hands. Bakugo and Mitsuki were now yelling at each other, and a folder was on the coffee table. "Then just fucking tell him, hag," Izuku said. Everyone's attention was drawn to Mitsuki's statement, "Someone just tell me what the fuck is going on." She cleared her throat before continuing. Mitsuki picked up the folder on the table and hurled it at Izuku, saying, "Well, this shit went sideways before it even began, but yeah, you're not in the foster care program anymore." Izuku opened it with doubtful eyes, and as he read, his eyes widened. He then glanced up at Mitsuki, who was grinning. "Welcome to the Bakugo family, Izuku." Izuku did not notice his new family's dejected expressions, so he only smiled a little. To be honest, Izuku hasn't had a joyful smile since the day his mother died in the house fire. Additionally, Izuku's fake feelings of joy and excitement were visible to the Bakugos. The Bakugos encouraged Izuku to at least practice his quirk, but he hasn't used it at all since that day. However, every time they asked Izuku about training his quirk, they always received the same angry response because of his stubbornness and self-loathing. "Fuck off and leave me alone." Since they knew Izuku loved them all like family, Mitsuki and Masaru had hoped that Izuku's adoption into the family would at least cause him to smile for a brief moment. However, all they received was a smile from the upset punk boy. They were relieved that Izuku expressed feelings other than anger, though, because they knew the smile wasn't fake. After Inko was killed in the fire 10 years ago, they could see that Izuku was still in pain. He never used his quirk for anything, which was a sign of that. The school community now questioned whether Izuku had one. But because he was so intimidating, nobody asked. But one group of people tampered with Izuku in spite of his intimidating appearance and presence. At first, the bullies saw Izuku as easy prey and showed no concern for his predicament. Izuku would initially be attacked and insulted by bullies, but Mitsuki told him he had to stand on his own 2 feet. Izuku eventually stopped being physically abused by the bullies after he learned how to fight back. However, that was just half of their tricks. It was a fucking jackass who said, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me." The worst pain a person can experience is verbal abuse. They seem to harm the soul itself. Izuku eventually learned to never let some words affect him, and he developed thick skin with some soft spots. Words can hurt more and last longer. Bakugo was partially to blame for that. He and Izuku ended up beating the living daylights out of the bullies. The 2 brothers had established a reputation as infamous punks who beat the living daylights out of bullies, and eventually they ran out of bullies to fight. Izuku eventually stopped receiving verbal and physical abuse as a result, and only the most naive individuals tried to harm him. However, Izuku and Bakugo ended up fighting most of the time because there was no one else left to fight. Oddly, the 2 became close through physical abuse. From an external perspective, their relationship could be described as dysfunctional. Izuku and Bakugo, however, saw it as a natural part of their relationship. They were practically brothers, after all, and more than just friends. Izuku even found the fighting therapeutic because it allowed him to release some of his suppressed feelings. Izuku even tried therapy to express his feelings on the subject of emotions. However, he simply refused to go after a year, claiming that they were only attempting to identify him. The Bakugos never brought up the topic again because Izuku was always silent about it and they were afraid of upsetting him even more. However, they were all able to observe firsthand, while Izuku was alone on the street, that he still had one tender spot. Mothers were the only thing Izuku felt affection for. Izuku always made an effort to assist women who had children. None of the Bakugos were certain, but they all believed it was a way to honor Inko or pay her back. Katsuki and Mitsuki once saw Izuku assisting a pregnant woman with her errands as they were turning a corner while they were out shopping for groceries. Mitsuki also witnessed Izuku assist a pregnant woman in moving some objects. The most startling thing Mitsuki noticed on both occasions, though, was the sincere smile Izuku gave the woman. When Mitsuki briefly witnessed Izuku being sincere, it served as a reminder that Izuku was struggling and only required the correct support. But enough about his history. With a ghostly smile, Izuku sat on the family couch and studied the adoption papers. Mitsuki approached him and gave him a hug, and Masaru returned the favor. Annoyingly, Katsuki approached and, with his other hand in his pocket, draped his arm over Izuku. Izuku simply laughed at what he saw, but he also felt sad about rejoining a family because there were now dangers. Being a member of a family also caused Izuku to experience fear, an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. Izuku, straining to keep up the act, said, "All right, I get it. Damn, that's a bomb to drop on a guy this early in the morning. Thank you, guys. Seriously, thank you. So, what now? Do I call you mom instead? Well, do you want to call Katsuki brother? Blah. Nah, that leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Hey, fuck you dipshit. Can it punk, and Izuku, if you're not ready to call me mom, then just Mitsuki or auntie." Izuku stood up and looked at her for a while without saying anything, but Mitsuki could tell that Izuku wasn't yet ready to call her mother. Now that he had cleared his mind, Izuku nodded his head for Bakugo to follow him as he began to walk to the door. "Okay, we'll be out for a while." Izuku left with his new brother, and Mitsuki grinned at him. She merely wished that she could assist Izuku in resolving his problems in the future. According to her, Izuku simply felt lost and alienated around him and had no idea what he wanted to do after middle school. Recently, Mitsuki started pressuring Izuku to attend UA, even if it was only for general studies, since he knew Katsuki wanted to go there. Mitsuki secretly thanked her son for his work. Why not attend high school together since those two always did everything together? In addition to hoping they could rely on one another, she hoped Izuku would receive more assistance because he was in dire need of it. In preparation for their daily morning run, Izuku and Bakugo were stretching. They quickly relaxed and started running around the neighborhood. Izuku made an emotionless face as they ran side by side in comfortable silence, but Bakugo struck up a conversation as he kept up with Izuku. Hey," Izuku asked, keeping his gaze fixed forward. Yeah? So, have you thought about what you're going to do in the future?" "No." "Why?" Bakugo growled and said, "You know why." Izuku scrunched his face up more and said, "For the last time, I'm not using my quirka and I'm not going to UA." He was clearly getting irritated because he didn't want to discuss this subject at such an early hour of the morning. Bakugo, however, was determined to assist Izuku and was not going to back down this time. "Stop giving me that shit, you're holding yourself back. Just come to Ua with me and we can figure this all out. As he accelerated to get away from Bakugo, Izuku said, stop, don't push it," with even more rage in his voice. Bakugo grimaced and accelerated to stay up with Izuku. Bakugo resumed his conversation after catching up to Izuku. "No, I'm not going to give up on my brother. You're wasting your potential. I know what happened sucked, but you can't keep living like this. You can't just wander through life hoping something changes. You can't just be an empty shell for the rest of your life. Shut up." Izuku's stubbornness had angered Bakugo, who knew that Izuku would not like this. "No, not this time. You've been wandering aimlessly through life. You don't have a goal. You don't do anything except whatever is placed in front of you. And because of that, you don't talk to anyone. It has been like this for almost a decade, and I want to know why. You've never told anyone, and you don't talk to me." Bakugo was furious. "Stop it right the fuck now. No. You stop. Tell me what the fuck is going on. Why don't you use your quirk? Why do you shut us out? Why don't you ever tell us anything? Why do you insist on not trying anything? Let me help Izuku." Izuku's rage finally overcame him at this point, and he simply stopped and struck Bakugo in the face, sending him to the ground. When Bakugo looked up, he saw Izuku clenched and shaking his fists in anger. Izuku stood above Bakugo, his dark green eyes glaring at him like daggers. Bakugo became even more irate and started yelling from the ground, saying, "I said to fucking stop, dumbass. It's my goddamn life, so fucking leave me be. Your fucking life involves this dipshit. So, fucking tell me what the hell is going on. I'm not backing down again. After this morning you're now my brother, and it's finally time I helped you with everything. So, either you tell me what's wrong or beat the shit out of me." Izuku ran his hands through his black and green hair and yelled, "Fucking stop it," since the cool morning air would cause the bruises to sting. Izuku's only desire was to punch Bakugo. However, Izuku remained motionless and his resolute gaze remained unwavering as he looked down at Bakugo, who simply accepted the verbal abuse Izuku directed at him, which infuriated Izuku even more. With his green and black hair covering his face, Izuku paused, raking his hands through his hair and squatted down to gaze at the asphalt. Bakugo got up from the floor when he noticed that Izuku had stopped being irritated. With his resolute eyes, he stood above Izuku and extended his hand. Izuku squatted down and stared at Bakugo's hand, growing more irate. "Izuku, let me help you. You don't have to open up, start being nice, forgive yourself, or find a goal right now. But just let me fucking help you." Bakugo stood tall and took the verbal abuse, but he spoke calmly in his softest voice, which still contained a hint of rudeness. "Oh. Why do you fucking care so much anyway? I've gone years without bothering to tell you shit. So, what gives you the right to demand answers out of me? And why do you give a shit all of a sudden? You were never this pushy before, so, fuck off already." Bakugo stood up and turned to face Izuku, saying without yelling, "Because Izuku, you're my best fucking friend, sparring partner, rival, and my goddamn brother. So, tell me what's going on, and I will help." Izuku knelt down and simply hung his head, looking down. His annoyance and rage were concealed by his veiled face. He took a deep breath before turning his head away, as he didn't want to look at Bakugo. Izuku got to his feet and looked up into Bakugo's eyes. Izuku stopped the teary, emotion-filled tears from streaming from his watery eyes, and Bakugo could see the hurt and pain in his eyes. Izuku eventually simply turned and left. Izuku preferred to be by himself, especially after being interrogated about his lack of conversation, so Bakugo knew he should just let him go. Bakugo let out a deep sigh and simply kept running while clutching his jaw, forgetting Izuku's strength as he allowed the nerd to strike him. Bakugo ran with renewed resolve, determined to help Izuku outdo him. Damn, the nerd can throw a punch. I'll give him that. I should have remembered that Izuku was usually the better fighter between USA. Why the fuck won't he tell me or anyone what he feels? I can see it eating his heart every day. And for fuck's sake, we're going to be third years at our shitty middle school. The nerd needs to get his shit together so I can surpass him. Bakugo kept working out while Izuku stalked off somewhere in the neighborhood, once more concealed beneath his black and green hair. Izuku's face took on an expression of indifference. Izuku, however, was a chaotic mess on the inside. Bakugo's words were echoing in his mind, making it difficult for him to concentrate. Izuku stopped in the middle of the road he was walking on and sighed as he looked up at the rising sun. Damn, Katsuki. What right does he have to pry in on my affairs? He's usually worse than me when it comes to showing emotion, and yet he's the one reaching a hand out to help me. Does that mean I've gotten worse? Izuku asked himself. Izuku thought it was crazy that Bakugo, of all people, was more sensitive to their feelings. However, he was unable to deny it because Bakugo has demonstrated sincere character development. Izuku let out a sigh of defeat, looked back at the ground, and carried on moving forward. So, Katsuki is improving himself, or at least that's what I hope. Izuku gave up on trying to solve his problems a long time ago because he knew there was no hope for himself. In the meantime, I suppose I'm getting worse because, after all, my temper has been getting worse as well. Izuku initially thought it was the right decision, but now he feels empty and almost all of his emotions aside from his rage and bitterness are fake. Izuku didn't bother to look where he was going, instead walking down the street with his eyes down and hidden under his hair. Why should he check his destination? At this hour, nobody is out and about doing anything. However, this time he was mistaken. Izuku landed butt first on the ground after slamming into a tall, lanky man. He and the man he ran into were both upset that someone had obstructed his path. The man's voice was dry and rough, with a hint of irritation. Izuku scowled as he became irritated as well, looking directly up at the man. "Hey, watch where you're going, brat. I was walking here." Only to see his eyes enlarge with surprise and astonishment. The man he encountered had black hair that was spiked and doubled as bangs. He even had rings at the top of his ears, and his eyes were the color of the ocean. His burnt lower eyelids and the burnt skin covering his entire neck and lower jaw, however, were his most noticeable features, and Staples were holding it there. His white t-shirt and his clothes were torn and ragged. Despite his depressing appearance, the man was not. And Izuku only said one thing in response to this sight. You've been burned. What was that, punk? I couldn't hear you over your muttering." Dabi was simply taking a morning stroll because he could have his hood down and fewer people were around to stare at him. He now encountered a brat with green and black hair who was dressed in a tank top and sweatpants. Although he wasn't particularly remarkable, the child somehow had a different opinion of him. "I said you've been burned. Yeah, and, are we playing a game of spot the obvious?" Izuku got up and said, "No, it's just I'm sure it hurts," but he still had to look up to look into the stranger's eyes. Dabi walked past Izuku and remarked, "Of course, it hurts. They're burns, not birthmarks. Now out of my way, you're wasting my time. For what it's worth, I'm sorry you got burned." Izuku looked down sorrowfully before answering, "It isn't worth much, and what shit do you know about burns? I don't exactly see you running around with any. My burns are more emotional than anything else." "Oh, how tragic, but I don't want to listen to some kid's sob story. Now listen to these words of advice, fuck off." Izuku simply took a deep breath and kept walking with his hands in his pockets after Dabi left. Izuku had a vague sense of understanding that man's suffering. Izuku didn't give it any more thought. He silently continued to complete his workout, pushing it to the back of his mind. Dabi carried on walking down a different street, hating the inconvenience of having to speak to someone. However, he was somewhat intrigued by that child because he felt sorry for him and was intrigued by him rather than being alarmed by his appearance. That's a first, but who cares? Dabi ignored it and continued to walk, wishing he had more cigarettes as he dozed off. Izuku's morning continued as usual. Even though his muscles hurt, he worked up a good sweat after finishing his routine. After that, he returned home and showered, dressed, and ate in preparation for school. Bakugo, who had applied makeup to conceal the bruise he sustained from Izuku's punch, had a run-in with Izuku. After that, they merely carried on getting ready for school without really speaking. Izuku said goodbye to Mitsuki and left the house, his mind scattered as he started to walk to school. He was certain that the morning had been interesting. Although Izuku was happy to have been adopted, he was now more uncertain, nervous, and suspicious than ever. Izuku was forced to consider things he had never wanted to consider again after everything that transpired this morning sent his mind into a tailspin. My quirk killed my mom. What would happen to my new family if I did it again? What if I caused someone to get burned? Since I won't be a hero anytime soon and I won't use my quirk, I won't have to worry about that. Izuku tried to remind himself of this, taking deep breaths and calming his thoughts in the hopes of repressing them. He tried not to think about that stuff, but guilt was eating away at him. Izuku assured himself that since he never uses his quirk, it would never happen again, but despite his best efforts, these thoughts would occasionally cross his mind. Izuku's face lit up with irritation because he knew that today would be difficult because these thoughts kept coming to mind. However, an explosive blonde would run to catch up to Izuku, interrupting his thoughts. Izuku turned to see Bakugo running after him, his disheveled uniform flapping in the wind, a snarl on his face. Damn Zuku, always leaving me behind. I thought we would always walk to school together, dumbass. Ah, sorry Katsuki, I was lost in thought and went on ahead. Well, don't let it happen again, you hear me? I already went for a run, and I don't want to go for another. Even if I did, I would do it faster than you. I understand. Let's just go to school, okay? On their way to school for the beginning of their third and last year, the two would walk in silence. A few students they passed along the way gave Izuku odd looks because they were anxious. Izuku was the resident villain among the student body, so their stares weren't unjustified. Bakugo made another attempt to contact Izuku along the way, saying, "Hey Zuku," but Izuku refused to repeat the action. He narrowed his eyes, took a deep breath, and sighed. For the last time, Katsuki, I'm not telling you anything. I'm not asking you to tell me anything. I know it is hard for you to relive the events of the fire every time someone mentions it, and occasionally the memory resurfaces along with the pain. But when you're ready to talk, come to me. I'm not any good with this emotional stuff, but at least I'm better than you at it. I want to help you." Bakugo stopped when Izuku stopped in the middle of his stride. Bakugo spun around, expecting to be punched once more, but Izuku simply smiled and gave Bakugo a sincere look. But Bakugo could see that he was acting because his eyes and smile were fake. Furthermore, Bakugo was certain that Izuku had forgotten how to be truthful with people. "This is why I know you'll be a great hero one day, Katsuki. You're persistent and you don't give up. You're already leagues ahead of me, I'm sure you'll be the best hero around." Bakugo approached and slapped Izuku, saying, You asshole." Izuku looked up to see Bakugo's fiercely irate eyes. "You make it sound like I'm giving up on turning you into a hero. I never give up. You always say you don't want to be a hero. I don't buy that shit for a second. You don't give up like that, dumbass. I know you'll be a hero one day, because deep down you want to be. But you won't be a better hero than me." Bakugo sucked in a few breaths to re-inflate his lungs after shouting at Izuku, who appeared stunned and astonished. Izuku then started laughing and turned to face Bakugo. It was obvious to Bakugo that Izuku was hurting him and pretending to feel all of his emotions, and the blonde was only irritated by the way Izuku looked at him. Fakers were among the things that infuriated Bakugo. "See, I told you you'd be a great hero one day." Bakugo remained silent as Izuku simply walked by, but he could see the pain in Izuku's eyes as he spoke. "The damn nerd still aspires to be a hero, and I can tell that deep down. I am aware of it. But he feels he can't be one because of what happened, and he doesn't seem to remember what it's like to want something. Crap, now what? He refuses to listen to me because he is so distraught. Izuku, what will it take for you to understand that you cannot reject yourself? Shitty nerd, I won't let you give up on your fucking dream. I'm going to stop now, so it's time for me to take drastic action." Thinking about how he could help Izuku accept himself and let go of the past, Bakugo grunted and continued walking to school. Izuku was receiving a lot of looks as Bakugo was walking, and he was annoyed that people continued to treat him like a villain even though he wasn't. "Fucking hell, this is going to be a shitty day, isn't it?" Bakugo said. Everyone in the class fell silent as soon as Izuku entered, but the teenager didn't seem to mind. He just went to his desk, removed the chain necklace that contained Inko's ring, and went to sleep. Bakugo entered shortly after and sat down directly in front of Izuku. Everyone in the class resumed talking after the two offenders were seated and calmed down. Bakugo had his legs up on the chair, and Izuku was dozing on the desk. They put themselves first, ignoring everyone else. Everyone in the class, meanwhile, paid no attention to the two. When the teacher finally entered, everyone quieted down and sat at attention, with the exception of Bakugo and Izuku, who couldn't care less. "Now class, settle down. It's a new year and you're all third years, so the first thing you'll need to take care of is your future career plans. This isn't permanent yet, that happens later in the year, but we would like to know what you all are thinking." At that point, everyone lost their enthusiasm, but the teacher resumed while tossing all of the papers into the air. "Oh, what's the point? You all want to be heroes anyway." The class cheered because they wanted to be heroes, but they were caught off guard by an explosion, and Izuku remained motionless as the explosion caused him to wake up. Now standing on his desk and chair, Bakugo interrupted the class's celebration. "Don't make me laugh, teach. Don't lump me in with these extras. I'm going to be the #1 hero one day, and Izuku is going to be the #2. Due to Bakugo's antics, everyone moaned. Though not brand new, this was becoming stale. Furthermore, Izuku never showed any signs of wanting to be a hero, so it was assumed to be a joke. Everyone ignored Bakugo because nothing new was happening, but then one of the younger students who had picked up the hottest takes had something to say. Yeah right, your jokes suck, Bakugo. You may have a chance to be a hero, but don't think the villain has a chance. We heard all about what he did. Bakugo glared at the new child and asked, what was that extra? He thought the boy was a transfer student because he didn't recognize him. However, if he was informed, he clearly had friends here who told him about some things. Oh, don't play dumb, Izuku the villain, being a hero. That's hilarious. From what I hear, he never uses his quirk, and he already has a kill under his belt, that being his mom. He's going to be a villain. Although the student's statement was technically accurate, everyone knew that Izuku wouldn't tolerate it, so murmurs and whispers of anxiety and fear started to spread. Bakugo was experiencing micro-explosions in his hands. Bakugo's only desire was to beat the living daylights out of this man. After hearing a chair move back, everyone turned to see Izuku awaken, reinserting his chain into his shirt. Izuku remained composed as he picked up his backpack and stood up, a smile spreading across his face as he conversed with the instructor. The teacher gave Izuku a worried, inquisitive look before observing Izuku approach the student and saying, "Hey, teach, sorry for what's about to happen this early in the year." Izuku continued to smile as he said, "So, you want to insult me? At least have the decency to tell me to my face. Why should I talk to a villain?" Izuku simply smiled more broadly before snatching the student's head and forcefully slamming it against the desk. Izuku casually and carelessly attacked a student while everyone watched in terror. The teacher was about to yell at Izuku after the student was knocked out, but Izuku outwitted her and addressed the entire class instead. Everyone froze as Izuku glared at them all, saying, "I don't care if you call me a villain all that much, but when you take it too far by mentioning my mom, I'll kick your teeth in." Izuku turned away from them, picked up the unconscious student, and slung him over his shoulder before giving the teacher a cold, intimidating look. "Hey, teach, I'm going to go get suspended again now, and I'll take his dumbass to the nurse's office." When Izuku left the classroom and brought the student to the nurse's office, the nurse gave the unconscious student a suspicious look. Izuku turned to face the nurse and smiled, asking, what happened to him? The nurse sighed, picked up an ice bag, and hurled it at the unconscious student, saying, "He tripped." Izuku was still standing in the room when she sat down. Izuku smiled at her, relieved that she understood. "I know there are going to be plenty of stupid students like him, so don't feel bad, but try to do better, Izuku. I see the way you treat me compared to others, I know there is good in you." The nurse shook her head and smiled at Izuku, saying, "Thanks for not lecturing me." Izuku smiled softly and turned to go, but not before saying, "Why would I want to annoy my most frequent customer?" As Izuku left the room, the nurse grinned and said, "I hope Rokuta is doing okay." The reason Izuku was always nice to her was unknown to her. She simply assumed it was because he wanted to lighten her load a little bit after helping her when she was having trouble with her toddler. She was concerned for the students who interacted with Izuku, even though she and Izuku had a good relationship. I wonder who else is stupid enough to piss off Izuku. Izuku made his way through the hallways until he reached the principal's office, where the teacher was already present. With a sigh, the principal turned to face Izuku. "Midoriya, I know this isn't the first time this has happened, and I'm not stupid enough to think it'll be the last time, but can I at least ask why?" Izuku said, "Sure, he insulted my dead mom, and insulted me," in a tone that suggested this was nothing out of the ordinary. The principal sighed and shook his head. "Look, I'll take care of the student and suspend you, but this has to stop. I understand your mother's death was unfortunate and accidental, but you must overcome this. You're ruining yourself with this. Maybe if you talk to the counselor or someone else, they can help. Think about your future and the future of this school, please." Izuku simply got up and brashly opened the door, saying, "I'll think about whatever I fucking want." However, his teacher interrupted him and asked him a question. "Midoriya, you never turned in our future career paper, I need it." Izuku stomped out of the school as the principal and teacher sighed, and the teacher began, saying, "The only thing you need to know is that I plan on doing whatever I want after I graduate." Why can't he just get over his mother's death for once? He can't keep assaulting students like this. And why isn't he expelled yet? Because if we help him get over his mother's death, then we can get him to use his quirk and he can be a hero. Bakugo will be a great hero and it will certainly make the school look good, but imagine what 2 great heroes coming from this school will do for us. The teacher, somewhat surprised by this information, said, so, we keep him around in the hope he uses his quirk. The teacher was briefly repulsed, but unlike most teachers who took Izuku's rough exterior at face value, he saw past it and said, pretty much, although his violent tendencies can hinder that. Well, I know he's a good kid because he pays attention in school and gets good grades. I also see him helping a few women from time to time. Izuku even has a positive relationship with the nurse. Yet the student population calls him a villain, and he just takes it. It's only when they mention his mother's death and his past that he gets violent. After both adults sighed, they called Mitsuki, who expressed her frustration that this was happening once more and promised to handle it for the 100th time. With a sigh, she pondered when she would get the opportunity to fix her boys. With the exception of his best friend, who is now his brother, one is a jerk to everyone, while the other is a good-hearted person who has experienced numerous emotional traumas that lead him to act violently when provoked. I really have my hands full with these two. In the middle of the day, Izuku left the school with his belongings. Since he was certain Mitsuki had received a call, he didn't want to go home and didn't know where he wanted to go. Izuku found some cash in his pocket and decided that, for the time being, going to the convenience store would suffice. Visiting the corner store in the area, cool air greeted Izuku as he entered. He went straight to the snack area and made a selection. Then he saw a familiar black hair walk over to the cashier as the door opened and he glanced over the shelves. Can I get some smokes, the ones on that shelf there? Izuku approached the man behind him as he left the aisle and saw the same frayed clothing he had seen earlier in the day. The man noticed it was Izuku when he turned his head slightly. Well, if it isn't the punk. Hey, how's it hanging? Dabi asked, watching with curiosity. There was something intriguing about this child that he couldn't explain. He saw Izuku with a snack after paying for his cigarettes. Izuku looked at him and saw him smile with his stapled and burned jaw. Hey kid, if you get me a snack, I'll give you a few of my smokes because I didn't have breakfast today. Izuku had nothing against this guy, so why not give him the cigarettes even though he didn't want them? Sure, just get something and I'll pay. Cool. Dabi made a selection, and Izuku covered the cost. Izuku gave him his snack as they walked out together, and Dabi offered him some cigarettes, but Izuku refused. Dabi smiled at the child and said, I don't have any problems with you, so consider this a good deed. As they started to walk, Dabi opened his snack and started to eat it. Hey, I like you, kid. What's your name? Izuku Midoriya, you. Izuku's face stayed as composed as ever as he said, I go by Dabi right now. And based on what you're wearing, you're a student. Shouldn't you be in school, or are you playing hooky today? Dabi's curiosity was aroused, so he asked away. I'm not playing hooky. I got suspended because I attacked another student. Did you actually attack someone, or are schools still shitholes ruled by the biggest liars, and they blamed it on you? Schools are still shitholes, but I did attack him after he insulted me. Dabi had to concede that this child was now a fun conversation partner. It was also intriguing to discover the reason behind his icy demeanor. What did he insult you about? He insulted my mom. Izuku briefly pulled a pained face as he spoke to Dabi, saying, oh, a mama's boy. She must feel so lucky to have you as a son. Izuku looked down and said, yeah, I guess, and Dabi noticed. What, did I say something wrong? Don't tell me something bad happened. Izuku stopped, and Dabi turned to look behind him, wondering why he had stopped. Izuku then looked up, his face sad. Dabi could see it in Izuku's eyes that something was bothering him. After all, he had a talent for reading people. Izuku tried to push something back down so he wouldn't have to feel it before he spoke. My mom is dead. Although Dabi appeared uninterested, he felt sorry for Izuku because his family wasn't exactly in the best of circumstances either. I sort of get how you feel. My mom isn't dead, but she is broken, almost like she's just not there, you know. Yeah, I can understand that, Izuku remarked, sounding somewhat empathetic. As they kept walking, they were silent until Dabi made the decision to speak up. Izuku looked down and felt a wave of regret and guilt, but he didn't say anything. So, how'd she die? But now was as good a time as any, he told himself, bracing himself. He's just a stranger I met, but he seems to understand me. Perhaps he can relate to me as well. He might be able to assist me in putting these feelings and memories away for good. Izuku waited for Dabi to label him a monster or demon and turn him away, but Dabi didn't do either of those things. Iya ua hama iya killed her. He simply gazed at Izuku without making any facial expressions. Izuku swallowed his emotions and stress and just said, "So, you killed her. How?" Izuku squeezed his eyes shut in nervous anticipation, expecting to be insulted, but instead he received another question. When my quirk first manifested, I didn't have control, and, in the middle of the night I accidentally activated my quirk, and it killed my mom. What's your quirk? Dabi then felt some pity for Izuku after he said, It is a fire quirk, a Calda, Black Blaze. He understood that losing his mother was difficult, but that his fire quirk was the reason behind it, and that controlling fire is difficult depending on how strong the quirk is. Izuku turned to face Dabi, wondering what he meant when he said, "I get it, you know. Fire destroyed your family. Well, it also destroyed mine too. While my family is alive, we are all strangers to one another. It is a fucked up family. Although my issue is that I'm not fully responsible for using fire to ruin my family, you are fully responsible in your case, and you could say I was a catalyst for the destruction to take place. You and I are similar in that regard." Izuku simply gave Dabi a wide-eyed stare. Is Dabi's statement accurate? Is he partially to blame for his family's destruction by fire? I'm not sure. Dabi didn't require an answer, but Izuku wasn't sure how to react. Dabi began to walk, and Izuku, eager to speak with him more, immediately followed him. "Come on, Izuku, let's go somewhere where we can talk more." They eventually arrived at Dagoba Beach's dumping ground, where Dabi started picking through the mountains of trash until he discovered a tiny pocket containing some items. Izuku, who had never been there before, also made his way through the trash heaps, albeit more slowly. Izuku eventually arrived at Dabi's trash hut as well. Izuku tried to keep up with Dabi and inquired, "Is this where you've been living?" "Yeah, don't touch anything or some stuff might fall over." Izuku went to sit next to Dabi, but at a considerable distance, while he sat on the trash house floor's edge, facing the water. Dabi took out some cigarettes and gave one to Izuku after they remained that way for a while. Dabi simply shook his head and said, "Oh sorry, I don't smoke." Izuku glanced at the cigarette and then put it in his mouth, saying, "You know, as a fire quirk user, smoke doesn't really affect us, so it's perfectly safe for you to have one." He saw a tiny blue flame emerge from Dabi's thumb as he snapped his fingers. First he lit his own cigarette, then Izuku's. In silence, they smoked while observing the water. After several hours, they engaged in a brief conversation about various topics, and Izuku observed that Dabi deliberately avoided bringing up heroes and family. Everything else, however, was up for grabs. Izuku found that his time with Dabi was peaceful and enjoyable, and he missed spending time with people who didn't view him as a villain or a special case. Izuku discovered that Dabi's peculiarity is known as cremation, and that, if not used carefully, it could cause him harm. Izuku also discovered that Dabi typically spends his days relaxing, but when he feels a passion, it lights up his heart, and he stops at nothing until it is satisfied. When Bakugo and Mitsuki attempted to call him while he was with Dabi, Izuku chose to ignore them in favor of the tranquility and enjoyment he was enjoying at the dump with Dabi. All Might was racing through the sewer system in search of the sludge villain who had so far eluded him. He was running out of time, and that sludge villain was dangerous, so he had to find him quickly. Damn, where could he have gone? I know he was around here somewhere. After racing through the sewers, All Might finally saw the villain making his way to the surface. All Might hurried over and passed through the manhole, but the sludge villain was nowhere to be seen. All Might noticed him down the street after he returned to the surface and took off, remarking on how terrible this was because his limit was being reached. Not good, not good, not good. Bakugo was alone on the street. Izuku was not waiting for him outside the gates as he usually did after being suspended, and school had ended. Bakugo wondered what the nerd was doing because it was strange. He initially assumed that Izuku frequented the convenience store near the school. However, because it was a hot day, Bakugo made the decision to stop at a vending machine and get a drink as he was walking. Bakugo got his drink, noticed the street was empty, and ignored it. After all, Not many students visited this area because it wasn't really in a residential area, and some people still had jobs. Bakugo kept walking down the street when he had a weird feeling and turned around to find nothing there. Bakugo was not prepared to see a massive sludge villain grinning down at him, so he turned back to face forward and chose not to follow his gut. You should do just fine for me to hide from him. Bakugo tried to defend himself right away by using his explosions. By the time he managed to get some explosions out, however, the sludge villain was quicker, and they hit the area and caused fires, drawing more attention to it. A slender blonde man arrived, looked embarrassed, and took out his phone to call for assistance. Bakugo had no idea why the man appeared guilty, but that was irrelevant. Bakugo became enraged when the heroes arrived and did nothing to assist him or put out the fires. Then a single, terrifying thought came to him. Am I going to die? Quote. They sat in silence for a few hours while Izuku completed his homework and Dabi observed and even learned a little from him. Then, wanting to hear the second half of the story, Dabi broke the silence. He thought Izuku should give a brief explanation of himself. So after you accidentally killed your mom, what happened next? I know there's more to this. Izuku shifted uneasily as Dabi recalled his painful and melancholy experiences. Izuku, however, looked down and searched for the right words. This was awkward because he had never discussed this with anyone before. Additionally, Bakugo stated that he needed to talk to someone about it, which is the only reason he is discussing it with Dabi. It was just by chance that Izuku was speaking to Dabi, a stranger who somehow understood his predicament. Dabi gazed at Izuku with curiosity and a hint of surprise. After I accidentally killed Hera, I stopped using my quirk. I haven't used it since that day. How is it possible for someone to avoid using their quirk for so long? Even for me, it's difficult. He resists, but I just get the urge to light something on fire, and then it's on fire. You're a curious and independent young person. Why did you stop using your fire? Dabi nodded, gaining a sense of Izuku's mental state, but he still wanted more details. Well, I promised myself that no one else would get hurt because of me. So, I stopped using my fire so I could protect everyone in my new family. Izuku took a moment to respond to Dabi's question, do you love your new family? I guess I love them, but they just don't feel like my family, you know. I appreciate everything they've done for me, and I would do anything to protect them, but I just can't seem to look at them like their family. Because I'm afraid I'll hurt them like my mom, and they'll hate me. Dabi simply laughed when he heard it. This child feared that his peculiarity would cause harm to others. Fire is present, he understood him, but it's not supposed to be safe. Because Dabi once aspired to the same thing but discovered it was an unattainable objective. That didn't alter the pathetic nature of Izuku's excuse, though. Dabi discovered the hard way that avoiding issues doesn't make them go away. This youngster is a complete pushover. He still believes that things can change the past, even though I don't run from my problems and I might be mired in the past. How gullible is this idiot? You're one interesting kid, you know that, Izuku. So, because of some mistake in the past, you refuse to use your quirk or call these guys your family, and you think your mom hates you. If you ask me, you're more attached to the past than I am, and you have yet to learn that a mother's love will never disappear. Izuku was feeling anxious about Dabi's annoyance. Izuku felt insulted and asked, what? He believed he had at last met someone who could relate to him. He also hoped this was more than wishful thinking. What you deaf to? To summarize, you're a damn pushover, you run from your problems, and you're stuck in the past thinking something will change if you stop dead in your tracks. Newsflash, dipshit, if you don't fight for what you want, then don't cry for what you lost. When this random jerk talked down to Izuku about his troubles, Izuku became more enraged. Izuku believed he understood, so he told him these things. He reasoned that this mess could be resolved later after he had had a chance to vent. Sighing, Dabi said, what the fuck, I told you that because I thought you'd understand. As Izuku became combative with him. I do understand, and I'm telling you, you're a little bitch who is running from the issue in front of you. We may have fucked up backgrounds, but the difference between you and me is that when faced with resistance, I burn it to the ground. You just sit there with your thumb up your ass. Dabi couldn't believe this child's stubbornness and exclaimed, shut up. You don't know me, you don't know what I've gone through. Izuku's anger was getting worse, and the sight of Dabi was making him angry. Oh, come on, don't spew this shit to me. Both our lives are shit. Okay, yours may not be so bad because you actually have people in it. And this whole sob story vibe you're having is really fucking annoying. It just screams, give me attention. And no, it's not. I thought I'd finally found someone who understood my anguish, dumbass. Well, I do understand. I just don't go around telling every soul in the hopes of getting validation. Honestly, the sight of your sob story ass makes me sick, not because of what happened but because you refuse to do anything about what happened. And by the way, no amount of guilt can change the past. And no amount of anxiety can change the future. So, stop mulling over useless shit and get your hands dirty. Shut the fuck up. Hell no, I'm sick of all these sad pieces of shit being everywhere. And you don't understand shit. You spew this bullshit about protecting people. Protect them from what? A mistake. That's all that fire in the past was, a mistake. A mistake repeated more than once is a decision. And I don't see your scrawny ass setting fires now, do I? Izuku opened his mouth to respond, but Dabi's words stopped him cold. Izuku knew his words were correct, even though he was still furious with Dabi. Dabi was correct, but Izuku didn't want to acknowledge it because he had been feeling this way for so long. Saying that Dabi was right felt strange, but Izuku wasn't thinking about that. He is correct, Dabi is correct. From what am I shielding them? I don't want to intentionally harm people, and I haven't made the same mistake twice since killing Mom. Even though I can't alter the past, I can at least alter the future to ensure that it doesn't occur again. Can I do that with my flames, though? And what makes me this way? What went wrong for me to get to this point? Izuku's internal monologue caught Dabi's attention, and he hoped he could break through his foolishly dense mind. But it never was, and Dabi knew it wouldn't be that simple. He could tell that Izuku was someone who always followed instructions and never really did anything for himself. Dabi was aware that Izuku could change even though he had forgotten who he was. Hey dipshit, let me ask you this. If you were the only one who could save someone and you had to use your quirk, would you save them? Or just let them die to keep your stupid promise to yourself? Which do you care about more? Unsure of how to respond, Izuku cast a downward glance. Izuku felt numb for some reason as he tried to think of his response. However, at the same time, Izuku had a very bad feeling inside of him. Izuku was about to ask a question when he heard explosions, but he quickly closed his mouth. Dabi was unaware of Bakugo, so he questioned what was wrong, but Izuku's eyes widened as he recognized that sound. Dabi turned to investigate the sound and asked, what the hell was that? Dabi, however, saw Izuku bolt from the dump and head toward the explosions as he was moving. Dabi followed the teenager out of curiosity to find out what was frightening him. They rushed through the streets to get closer to the location of the sounds after bursting out of the beach dump. Izuku sprinted past everyone as quickly as he could, almost toppling them. Izuku's mind was racing, trying to come up with a reason for these occurrences, but nothing stopped him from running. Izuku was aware that Bakugo would only use his explosives in dire situations. He had to be certain it wasn't Bakugo. He had a terrible last encounter with him. Izuku had to check that everything was alright. Izuku's eyes were wide with shock as he turned the final corner. The scene was being watched by the crowd. As a fire raged and burned many things, heroes did nothing but stare and worry. The people were being held back by the heroes while a sludge villain attacked. Then Izuku noticed it, though. Bakugo was unable to breathe while he was in the sludge villain's grasp. Izuku's blood ran cold at the expression on Bakugo's face, which was one of pure terror. This time, Izuku showed genuine emotion. Dabi appeared panting and hunched over, placing his weight on his knees as Izuku stood there in shock and fear. Dabi looked up to see Izuku's shocked and scared expression, and he followed his gaze to see the sludge villain's situation. Damn, I need to get back in shape. As the situation worsened, he became enraged that the heroes were doing nothing to assist. Izuku's legs suddenly moved, but he was too shocked to think of anything. Izuku felt as though mist was filling his head, his mind was clouded by fear and anxiety, and he was unable to concentrate. However, a faint light that came from deep within compelled Izuku to take action. A small, slender, blonde man stared at Izuku in amazement as he rushed in and pushed past everyone. Everyone in Izuku's path was pushed aside with greater force and speed, and the heroes attempted to prevent him from moving closer. Izuku, however, slipped past them, ducked under their arms, and kept running. Izuku approached the sludge villain and attempted to seize him in an attempt to drag Bakugo away. Izuku's face flashed with fear and terror as he tried desperately to figure out what he was doing. Izuku then caught a glimpse of the sludge villain winding up his arm and grinning out of the corner of his eye. After being swatted away by the sludge villain, Izuku fell through the air, colliding with a lamppost and then striking his head. As the heroes watched the fires rage on, the crowd screamed in fear as Izuku went limp. His heart was telling him to do something, and a little blonde man with sunken eyes grabbed it. But he was simply too weak to do so. The blonde man, however, saw the teenager rise from the ground. Izuku's vision was blurry, so he had trouble moving, but he felt some of the fog in his head lift, allowing him to concentrate a little. Izuku's head cleared somewhat as he stood up, and then a memory appeared in the recesses of his thoughts. Izuku, you are loved. Izuku's mind replayed Inko's final words. Izuku's thoughts returned to the night that Inko was stolen from him by the fire. As black fire raged around her, Izuku looked down to see Inko's injured form lying beneath debris. Izuku's mind began to drip with feelings that he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Reliving the worst night of his life, Izuku briefly felt emotions he had long forgotten. Izuku kept staring at Inko while he was still living in his memory, and then he witnessed her being consumed by the flames. Izuku's eyes started to well up with tiny tears as he relived the most terrible night of his life, and then Dabi's words replayed in his mind. A mother's love will always be there. Don't weep over what you lost if you don't fight for what you want. The past cannot be changed by guilt. Furthermore, anxiety cannot alter the future. Izuku was not sure why, but he felt calm and his mind suddenly became a little clearer as strong feelings of anger took over his senses. As everyone watched, Izuku slowly stood up and removed a ring-adorned chain. Then, his face filled with determination and rage, Izuku inhaled deeply, reattached the chain, and shouted into the air, verbally expressing his rage. Warmth. Extremely hot. Everyone winced and closed their eyes to try to shield themselves from the intense heat as a wave of warmth erupted in all directions. Compared to the new feeling that pervaded the air, the old flames at the scene were insignificant. And everyone's eyes widened in shock and bewilderment as they turned to face the teenager battling the sludge villain. With Inko's ring in his hand, Izuku stood motionless. The outside observer could see no emotion on his face. But beneath the surface, Izuku sensed a flicker of emotion. And that spark caused his body to radiate a searing heat that began to dry out his surroundings by causing nearby water to evaporate. Dabi watched in bewilderment because this power had nothing to do with fire. Rather, it was a broad heat wave that severely dried out the skin. Izuku's expression was blank, but his eyes were filled with anger and sorrow, which Dabi found even more strange. However, Izuku seemed more irate the closer Dabi looked. More heat started to escape Izuku as he gazed at the sludge villain, eventually causing people to back up in an attempt to feel the cool air. As the heat increased, Dabi realized he had to prevent Izuku from acting foolishly. He then started to push past the fleeing individuals. After a while, Izuku composed himself, but the feelings in his eyes continued. Izuku regained his composure and shoved the ring and chain back into his shirt. Then he began to move toward the villain of sludge. The sludge villain grimaced as Izuku drew closer, feeling the sludge's liquid begin to evaporate as the heat around Izuku increased. Izuku didn't even have a flame on him, but he did radiate intense heat around himself, giving the impression that he was on fire. When Dabi finally reached the front lines of the conflict, he detested the dreaded heat he was experiencing. Even though Izuku didn't have any flames, the heat was so intense that it made his skin itch and feel like it was burning. When Izuku's flames actually came out, Dabi didn't want to see or feel the heat he was packing. Dabi concluded that he was superior to Izuku for making a foolish decision. After donning his hood, he pushed past the stunned heroes, who all retreated when they saw him. Izuku ran in, and Dabi called out to him as he moved to the front. "Hey, dweeb." Izuku glanced over after hearing an insult. Izuku was startled from his grief-induced rage, which also made the searing heat around him stop moving. Izuku's eyes widened like saucers when he turned to see Dabi grinning and holding out his hand. "Why don't you leave the heat to a real pyromaniac?" Izuku knew what Dabi was planning the moment he looked at him. Izuku leapt at the sludge villain without hesitation and was able to control Bakugo. Izuku was able to tear Bakugo from the villain's grasp and dive off to the side because the sludge was weaker because so much of the liquid was evaporating. Dabi's hand was glowing blue flames in his pocket, and he smiled madly. Suddenly, a huge stream of blue fire shot forth. The heat was short-lived but far worse than Izuku had imagined just a moment before. The sludge villain was struck and blown to pieces across the street by the stream of blue flames. The heroes were shocked by what had just transpired, and the scene was a sludge mess. Dabi walked over to the boys who were covered in sludge after noticing that his work was finished and waving his hand to cool it off. Dabi picked Izuku up with a cheeky smile on his face after noticing that he was breathing heavily but otherwise doing well. As he got Izuku to stand, Dabi asked, "How are you doing, dumbass?" Izuku simply laughed and smiled eerily at Dabi. "Could be better, but it isn't that bad," Izuku uttered slowly. Dabi pointed to the heroes who were rapidly approaching them and said, "Good, because we are in trouble." Bakugo stood up and glanced at Izuku before turning back to Dabi. "Who's the freak?" While glaring at Dabi, Bakugo turned back to Izuku and said, "Well, that's not nice. I did just save your life, Sparkler." "Heya." Izuku turned to face Bakugo, who was trying to swallow his pride and appeared embarrassed. Izuku gave him a gentle glance before saying, Thanks for saving Maya, and I'm sorry for making you use your quirk." Bakugo was taken aback by his gentle smile. This was a spark of real gratitude because Bakugo could see that it was driven by real emotion rather than anger or grief. "It's no issue. Although, for some reason, I couldn't get any flames to appear, and hey Bakugo. I may still be confused, angry, sad, grief-stricken, etc. But from now on things will change. I will get better, brother." Izuku's statement shocked Bakugo, but he smiled at his brother with a hint of pleasure. Dabi simply gave a disinterested shake of his head. However, the three boys all shared the belief that things would change for them all. Izuku had such a great quirk, and he inspired that random man to jump in and help. Toshinori would watch in awe as Izuku just ran in without thinking. Toshinori was aware that he had to speak with Izuku right away. At the moment, Dabi was doing his best to avoid yelling at the pointless pros in front of him, while Izuku was being reprimanded by the heroes for hurrying into a perilous situation. Additionally, Bakugo appeared to not even want the praise that he was receiving for his peculiarity. When the three boys finally had enough of the heroes in front of them, they all spoke at once and in unison. At the same time, they all exclaimed, "Fuck off." They were genuinely a couple of delinquents with a single goal. After the boys were freed from the heroes, Bakugo looked down and put his hands in his pockets as they started to leave the scene. Dabi's hands were in his pockets and his hood was up, but he was grimacing because Izuku's heat had made his skin extremely dry. Izuku stood in the center of the group, staring blankly down at Inko's ring in his hand. Not really knowing where to go, the three strolled down a random street. They simply moved as a group, and Izuku and Dabi met at the corner store. Bakugo stated that he wanted to get a drink once he arrived in order to wash away the taste of the sludge. Izuku and Dabi watched Bakugo go and waited for him to come back by simply leaning against a wall. Dabi simply gazed up at the sky, while Izuku continued to focus on the ring. Izuku finally asked a question to end the silence. Dabi looked at Izuku and asked, "Hey Dabi, do you think you could help me train my quirk?" He was unable to discern Izuku's emotions. Izuku had been suppressing his feelings for years, so it was difficult to read at times when he was doing so. Izuku sighed when Dabi explained, "Why should I help you? I never had any help with my quirk, and I turned out fine. Dude, I'm 10 years out of practice. I couldn't even conjure any flames to use, all I did was emit heat. And that was because my emotions got the better of me. I could use the help if I'm going to do anything with my fire." Dabi looked back up at the sky, wondering how strong Izuku could become if he trained. "But are you sure that's what you want? No offense, but you never used your quirk till today. How can I be sure you're not going to just revert back to the little bitch that refused to use his quirk?" Izuku took a deep breath and answered after glancing down thoughtfully. Izuku said the last part with a slight smile, attempting to channel the emotion he had felt earlier. "I'm still reluctant to use my quirk, especially during a situation like the one that just happened. I mean, I nearly lost control because my emotions got the better of me, but what you said to me at the dump was true. I can't run from my problems anymore. I guess I should take a page from your book and try to burn down any resistance to me achieving my goal." "So the little shit has finally decided to do something about the past," Dabi said with a smile to Izuku. "He may still fail, but I have nothing better to do. I can tell he finds it awkward to express his feelings. As long as you don't run from your problems again, then sure, I can help you out. Just promise you will not hide from your problems again. Hiding from problems just creates more problems. I don't want to train a little bitch who has a habit of making things worse." With a slight smile on his face, Izuku took hold of the ring and replaced it on his chain. "I have to get stronger. During the fight, I realized that if I want to protect what I hold dear, I have to have strength. I have to stop feeling guilty for the past. I wasn't strong enough then, and I'm not now. It's just like you said, no amount of guilt can change the past, and no amount of anxiety can change the future. So, I have to take action and do what's right for my mom and current loved ones. I have to get stronger. Izuku's statement caused Dabi to giggle, raising eyebrows. You know I pulled that out of my ass when I told you that, right? Dabi simply laughed at Izuku and said, I figured, but I don't care, you were right. Even though Izuku's objective was to become stronger for his own selfish gain, he was at least relieved that Izuku had some kind of objective. He's not doing it for anyone else, he just wants to get stronger to help himself. Talk about the pinnacle of self-centeredness. I don't care, though, I'll help him achieve his goal of strength. Yeah, whatever, I'll help you out, but in return, you give me breakfast every day when you come to the dump for training. Izuku clenched his teeth. You want me to go to the dump every day and get you breakfast? Isn't that a bit overkill for training? You said it yourself, you're 10 years out of practice. As far as I'm concerned, it's not enough if you want to get stronger. So, I'll be going now. I need to go get some sleep if I'm going to have to train your punk ass every morning. Bakugo came over to Izuku from the corner store just as Dabi was leaving to return to the dump he called home. He was holding 2 drinks, and as he leaned against the wall, he threw one to Izuku. Bakugo then had to inquire as to what had changed in Izuku since he had last seen him at school, as he had been suspended once more. Izuku stopped drinking his drink and, if he was being honest, forgot all about Bakugo's reaction. Okay. Spill it. What the hell happened today? First thing in the morning you were closed off and denying your dream of being a hero with tears threatening to drop from your stupid face while trying to get me to pick up the dream. Next thing I know you're briefly using your quirk and hanging out with Scarface like nothing ever happened. Izuku put on a thoughtful, blank face as he considered his response. Well, about that I had a really long conversation with Dabi and he sort of called me out on my bullshit. But like really called me out, so he kind of helped me start to get over my past in some weird way. I still have a mountain's worth of issues, but he helped figure out where to start. When Izuku discovered that a random homeless man had assisted him in solving a problem he had been attempting to solve for 10 years, Izuku could sense Bakugo's rage. Although it still annoyed him, Bakugo was able to accept it for the time being. It was almost as if he was relieved that Izuku was not depressed. Izuku smiled at Bakugo, who was clearly relieved that he was doing much better. It doesn't matter anymore. All that matters is that you're trying to use your quirk again, and now that you finally began dealing with your stupid emotional baggage you can start to move on. But you won't be a better hero than me, Izuku said. Although Bakugo could still see the doubt in Izuku's mind, he was unaware of the reason for Izuku's self-doubt and would have to find out quickly to avoid a tantrum. Damn nerd. You had better not get depressed again or I'll beat the living daylights out of you. I can see that a few other emotions have returned, but they are still hidden by his problems and traumas. At this point, Izuku realized that he had left his school supplies at the dump with Dabi. Since he had completed all of his assignments, he could theoretically leave them with Dabi, but he would prefer that he not use them for target practice. Izuku started to run away as soon as he finished the drink Bakugo gave him, saying, Hey Katsuki, I forgot my bag with Dabi, I'll see you at home. Bakugo continued to stare at him, uncertain of how to respond to Izuku's self-doubt, but that would have to wait for the time being. Bakugo had to first assess Izuku's mental state. Although he could see that Izuku was improving slightly, he was still aloof and almost emotionless. Izuku abruptly stopped while running around the neighborhood to return to the dump. His years of fighting had given him some pretty good instincts, so he knew someone was watching him when he felt eyes looking down at him. Izuku looked around even though it was impossible to tell where the staring was coming from. And this was unusual because no one was around to gawk at him. Izuku had to cover his eyes to prevent dirt from getting in them when a huge gust of wind suddenly blew out of nowhere. However, his eyes popped open in astonishment as he saw the most powerful hero, the symbol of peace, All Might, standing directly in front of him. Ha 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 ha, hello there young citizen, I am All Might. All Might was a little surprised by Izuku's remarks because he wasn't used to this emotionlessness or dryness, and from a teenager of all people, but he cleared his throat. Yeah, I got that, what do you want? Izuku said with unexpected indifference. Ahem, well young man, I saw what you did today with the sludge villain, and I must say that was impressive. Izuku glared at the hero and demanded, wait, if you were there why didn't you do anything? With venom and frustration in his voice. Izuku saw a cloud of smoke before he saw a small, thin man. Well about that he said. Izuku's face was bewildered as the two locked eyes in stunned silence, while Toshinori was perspiring profusely and staring at him with concern. Izuku's expression was indifferent as he said, okay, am I getting punked or something? Because this is a very bad joke. Izuku simply sighed and wiped his face before turning back to Small Might. I assure you this is no joke, I am All Might, this is my true form. Well, I got to say, I was not expecting that. I'm going to guess you don't want people to know about this. Toshinori held out his hand to a bench on the street and said, yeah, I can explain it to you if you'd like. Izuku gave it a curious glance before continuing. Izuku started to leave, but Toshinori started to walk beside him. As entertaining as that would be, I need to go get my school bag, so I guess I'll see you around. Izuku said. Izuku gave him a somewhat intrigued look but sighed anyhow as he proceeded to walk to the dump. If it's not too much trouble, I do have something to tell you, as well as an offer if you're interested. Considering you're already walking with me, sure, why the hell not, explain away. He held out his hand to the boy and said, thank you, but I should probably start with my name, I am Toshinori Yagi. Izuku shook his hand amicably and they resumed their stroll as Toshinori gave an explanation of why he had come looking for Izuku. Izuku Midoriya, or I guess Izuku Bakugo now, whatever suits your fancy. Izuku put his hand to his chin and tried to come up with a response. Okay young Midoriya, let me ask you, do you know what my quirk is? He asked. I'm guessing some sort of strength transformation given your moveset and buff form, but other than that no clue. Toshinori briefly laughed at the teenager, which caused Izuku to become a little confused. When Izuku heard what Toshinori was implying, he stopped walking. Could it be that he was being played? Well, yes and no. My quirk does enhance my strength, but that's not all it does. It's a stockpiling power, and it's been passed down for generations until it landed in my hands. However, he needed to know more in case this was the truth. That is ridiculous. Quirks can't be passed on like some Olympic torch. Everyone either gets a mutation in their genes or it gets passed down by the parents since they're hereditary. Yes, that is true, but my quirk does work like a passed-on torch, and truth be told I'm looking for a successor to pass my quirk onto. My quirk is called One for All and it has been passed down since quirks became a thing. It's a stockpiling power that enhances quirks when it's given to someone. So Izuku Midoriya will you be? Izuku's words, I'm going to stop you right there Skelly, startled Toshinori once more. Toshinori put on a serious face and said, okay dude, why me? What the hell do you see in me? Izuku's eyes widened slightly, indicating to Toshinori that he was correct. He smiled slightly. During the sludge villain incident, everyone was standing aside, the heroes didn't move, and as shameful as it is, that includes me. But you ran in anyways, even if you couldn't win you went in, let me guess your legs moved without thinking right. Toshinori's expression was thoughtful, but he smiled slightly. Don't flatter yourself Gramps, although you're correct in that I went in without thinking, there was a lot more happening at that moment than you think. I let my emotions control me, and that guy the first saved was my brother. I see, regardless you still went in and even inspired someone else to help out. A hero's job is to help and protect people, you did that today. A hero is also supposed to inspire others to do good, and you did that today. Izuku Midoriya, you are capable of being a great hero, so I want to pass my quirk onto you. Izuku looked at him with a, are you sure? The expression on his face. Izuku simply let out a long sigh before speaking to Toshinori. This teen was fascinating to Toshinori, who was shocked for the third time today when he asked, you're not very bright, are you? He said, perspiring, I don't think I understand where you're coming from. Izuku gestured with a few fingers before pointing out how foolish this circumstance was. 1. You just met me and are offering me great power, which is the peak of naivety. 2. You have no idea what my motivations are, so how can you trust what you saw? 3. All I did was run into a fight and barely help, I can't even control my quirk and emotions. 4. You're telling all this to a guy who may or may not even want to be a hero, seriously I have no idea if I want to even try. And 5. You have to be really dense not to think this through. Toshinori looked at Izuku's blank face and had difficult time disputing what the teenager was saying. It's unbelievable that a teenager is lecturing me, Toshinori remarked, dejectedly looking down. Izuku dismissed Toshinori's grief and started to return to the dump, saying, at least you know now. Toshinori, however, started following once more, much to Izuku's chagrin, with a determined expression in his eyes. As he looked down and considered it, Izuku had a ghostly dejected expression on his face. Toshinori saw it before Izuku concealed his feelings and answered, "Well, since you brought up those good points, let me ask you. Do you want to be a hero? And why?" Toshinori raised an eyebrow at what Izuku was implying, assuming that he understood the desire to get stronger and wanted to assist Izuku in achieving it. "To be honest, everything is a little unclear, and I honestly don't know if I want to be a hero. For the longest time, I haven't had any sort of goal in my head, but after today I realized what I need right now is strength, so I want to get stronger." That's the best answer I got. Unfortunately, Toshinori's mouth spoke before his brain did, but he could sense Izuku's potential and that there was more to his story. Izuku's short, gloomy expression as he looked down was not noticed by Toshinori, who asked naively, "Why do you want to get stronger?" Then, in order to let Toshinori know that he was grieving, Izuku reached for the ring on his chain and took it out. Toshinori's face softened as he said, "This ring belonged to my Moma. I have it because she died." He felt bad for bringing up the memories, which obviously upset and hurt Izuku. "I'm sorry for bringing it up, you have my condolences and apologies." Izuku said, "No, it's not your problem, it's mine," as he repressed all of his feelings and started to walk with Toshinori at his side. "If you want to talk about it, we can, but young Midoriya, know that although my choice to pass my quirk onto you was hasty, I have no doubt in my mind you'll be a great hero one day if that's what you're aiming for, so I want to give my quirk to you." Toshinori's expression was a little dejected, but he brightened it with another idea to help Izuku. "And I already told you, I don't have control over my quirk or emotions, so imagine what a power booster would do. And I'm not worthy, I've got too many problems to deal with. Plus, I don't even know for sure that I want to be a hero, I have no goal except to get stronger at the moment." Toshinori felt that he owed Izuku something for stepping up when he couldn't, but it was okay if Izuku didn't want to be a hero. Izuku smiled slightly at his offer. Toshinori could see that it was a tentative and unsteady smile, but it was sincere. "I'll respect your choice to not receive the power, but at least allow me to help you control your quirk and try to help you figure out if you want to be a hero. I owe you that much for doing my job for me, it's the least I can do." Izuku was even more interested and worried because it appeared that he hadn't smiled in a long time. Toshinori, however, was more alarmed by Izuku's instantaneous repression of his feelings. Izuku continued to walk to the dump, saying, "I don't know what you can do for me because I found a guy to help me control my quirk." Izuku laughed at the idea of All Might attempting to help him gain self-control. "I can teach you what there is to know about heroics, or how to fight. I have plenty of experience. Just think of me as your mentor," he said. Even though having a supportive coach felt awkward, the concept did seem appealing. As Izuku thought about the offer, Toshinori grinned at him and said, "Tell you what, I'll go to one of your training programs and we'll see what happens. Sound good? If it helps you even a little bit then it's worth it. I'll give you my number so we can stay in contact. And remember I am your mentor now. Not yet, old man, I still have to try out your training." Before heading to the beach dump, Izuku waved the hero away after getting his number and giving it to Toshinori. Dabi wasn't there, except when Izuku got there and found his way through the garbage to his trash hole. Izuku picked up his belongings and went home without giving it any thought. Izuku was just thinking. There were no fascinating ideas running through his mind. Izuku finally considered the possibility of attempting to play the role of hero once more. Izuku, if he was telling the truth, had forgotten why he wanted to try to be a hero. But since his only objective at the moment is to get stronger for the benefit of people close to him, he was prepared to overlook that. Izuku was content to remain a heartless, emotionless shell of a person, but at this point, he has some control over what happens with his quirk. All I have to do is learn self-control so that I can safeguard my family and avoid making another deadly error. The final objective is more important than any incident that occurs along the way. Izuku was aware that his peculiarity was risky, but that's what fire is, isn't it? Just more risk. Izuku killed his mother with his fire, even though it hurt to admit it. No matter how hard he tried, he was unable to forget that. Izuku, however, was aware that he didn't want to use his fire to harm his family. And strengthening and improving self-control are the only ways to accomplish that. I hadn't used my quirk in a decade until today, and I was unable to create any flames at all. It's dangerous that I'm so out of practice. Normally, as always, I would just repress my quirk. That is no longer an option, though, given how strong it might have become and how emotional I might become. To keep them safe, I have to keep it under control. I am the only person capable of handling my danger. Izuku was well aware of his extreme danger, as were Bakugo, Mitsuki, and Masaru. Dabi most likely realized that as soon as he noticed his peculiarity. They all made an effort to persuade Izuku to make positive changes, and perhaps it was time to give it a listen in light of today's events. Izuku felt satisfied with his task and proceeded to walk down the street to his house. I have a long way to go before I can protect my family. But thankfully, all I need to do is get stronger, then I can put his all behind me again. So, I'll see how strong I can get tomorrow. Izuku stared emotionlessly up at the horizon of the setting sun, wondering if this was how he used to feel as a child. Did I feel this way when I had a goal? Something to sustain me? Even though Izuku was not aware of it, a tiny part of him detested the thought of stopping once he gained strength. After walking the remaining distance home, Izuku arrived at his house and entered, but he was unprepared for what would happen to him. His mother, Mitsuki, seized Izuku as soon as he entered and pushed him into a vigorous bear hug. Mitsuki tightened her grip on Izuku, making it difficult for him to breathe, pressing his face against her large bust. While being pressed against Mitsuki's breasts, Izuku started to turn blue, but she either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. After Izuku turned a deep shade of blue from oxygen deprivation, Mitsuki finally put him down. She simply gazed down at him as he gasped for air. Mitsuki's gentle expression caused Izuku to wonder what was going on as he looked up and met her eyes. He was used to her constantly cheering for something or reprimanding Bakugo while shouting at the top of her lungs. Izuku was a little alarmed by this, but his worries were allayed when she spoke in a tone of pride. Looking at her with curious eyes, Izuku said, "Good job, son. I'm proud of you." When Mitsuki heard that, she became enraged and snarled at Izuku, asking, "What did I do to get your praise and not a swear in the ear?" Mitsuki seized Izuku once more and gave him a tender embrace. Can't a mother be proud of her punk son? Just shut up and accept the praise, damn it. Mitsuki said. Fortunately, Izuku was able to speak because he wasn't pushed into her bust. With a vein visible on her head, Mitsuki angrily took out her phone and played a video of Izuku racing in to save Bakugo. "No, it's just I have no idea what you're talking about," she said. After deciding that he had received enough maternal affection for the day, Mitsuki squeezed Izuku even harder, and Izuku tried to come up with a plan of escape. He decided that the best course of action was to give Izuku a hug in return. Mitsuki was taken aback for a moment, but she responded with a smile. Izuku's expression softened a little as he said, "I'm proud that you saved Katsuki and stopped that villain. I know you'll be a good hero one day." He wasn't sure if he even wanted to be a hero because, at the moment, all he wanted was to gain strength to defend his family. However, Mitsuki spoke before Izuku could become even more depressed. Mitsuki said, "By the way, I heard you got suspended again, in a way that was too easy." Izuku attempted to wriggle out of the bear hug right away, but Mitsuki was too strong and lifted her instead. Izuku simply accepted the punishment he would receive this time around. Mitsuki would force him to clean his wounds with whatever medication hurt the most after he got into a fight. Regarding suspensions, he could only hope she was feeling upbeat today because those penalties change based on her mood. However, as Mitsuki carried Izuku to his room, he noticed Bakugo unconscious on the couch, appearing to have been tortured. Izuku's face went completely white when he realized that he had very little chance of surviving Mitsuki's punishment. Izuku's eyes were fluttering awake as the sun just edged over the horizon. Izuku felt his body ache after moving it. Damn, Mitsuki, was that really the extent of your punishment? It was early in the morning, and Izuku was rising earlier than anyone else just to prepare Dabi breakfast. Anyway, I have to get up and make him some breakfast, but I'm sure he'll eat anything, so there's no need to go all out. Izuku placed the breakfast in a container with some plastic knives and forks after he was done cooking. Izuku entered his and Bakugo's room quietly and went upstairs to dress. Izuku dressed quickly, putting on a gray sweatshirt and a gray tank top underneath a pair of black joggers. Bakugo woke up with a moan and rubbed his face, stopping him as he was about to go back downstairs to leave. Bakugo got out of bed, rubbed his eyes, and yawned. "Where do you think you're going? We have training to do." Bakugo narrowed his eyes at Izuku and said, "I'm going out to train. I need to work on my quirk and get stronger." Although Izuku seemed to be telling the truth, Bakugo could tell that wasn't quite the case. He had no idea what was wrong with Izuku, but he was pleased that he seemed motivated to work on his peculiarity. "Let me get dressed and I'll go with you, you still need to work out." "Dude, it's about an hour before you usually wake up. Are you sure you want to do that?" Bakugo simply glared at Izuku, his voice raised but not loud, his face displaying an angry expression. Izuku simply sighed and shook his head at Bakugo, saying, "Of course, I want to do this, idiot. I'm not that fragile." Izuku simply walked out of the room and downstairs to put on his shoes and get Dabi's breakfast, saying, "Fine, whatever, just hurry up. I'm leaving soon." Bakugo put on his shoes and descended in his typical training attire. They simply left without saying anything and ran as usual. This time, however, Izuku took them to Dagoba, a beach dump. The two fit delinquent teenagers ran easily, even though it was a slightly longer run. When they finally reached the dump, Bakugo gazed at the heaps of rubbish with interest, wondering why they were there in the first place. Izuku glanced at the trash heaps and searched the area for a specific individual. Then he saw a familiar lock of black hair with spikes sitting on top of a pile, gazing out to sea. Izuku leapt over the beach railing and ran down the steps to Dabi, who heard someone running on the sand and became aware of his presence. Izuku simply held up the breakfast, and Dabi quickly changed his mind with a, "Oh hell yeah," as he ran down the pile, grabbed the food, and began gorging himself. "Well, if it isn't the punk, isn't it too early to be doing this stuff?" Izuku asked. Bakugo descended as Dabi was eating and gave him a displeased and irate look. When Bakugo became irate, Dabi smirked and continued to eat. "Aw, come on, don't tell me Scarface here is going to train you," he said. Bakugo was fuming with rage, and Dabi was still eating. "Well, if it isn't the firecracker, what's it to you? My decisions are my decisions, the same goes for dark green over there." Bakugo turned to an uninterested Izuku and screamed, "Anything that concerns my brother is my business. I'll be a better trainer than you, Scarface." Dabi, however, was reluctant to drop it so quickly. Izuku merely sighed as Dabi said, "Oh yeah, then prove it to me, firecracker," not even paying close attention to Bakugo. However, he felt someone grab his sweatshirt and start dragging him away. He was being pulled off to another location in the dump by Bakugo. Izuku simply sighed once more as Bakugo continued to drag him away. "Come on, loser. I got to show up that burnt fucker by making you stronger with my training." He somehow believed that this training would be his downfall, and if Bakugo had anything to prove, he would do it regardless of how he got there. After completing a series of challenging exercises that Bakugo had made him perform, Izuku was sweating profusely an hour later. Bakugo was yelling uncontrollably as he deadlifted a car's rear axle that he discovered had concrete blocks fastened to the ends, while Izuku had just completed 4 sets of 15 handstand push-ups. Izuku smiled slightly as he watched Bakugo give it his all while wearing a feral face. "Raahhhhhh." Bakugo screamed into the morning air, the vein on his neck bulging. Dabi sat on top of another piece of trash to observe after finishing his breakfast. He eventually descended and approached Izuku, who was lying in the sand, gasping for air and drenched in sweat. Izuku got up and followed Dabi to an area of the beach that was nearly entirely covered in trash. "Well, it looks like you're ready to start your quirk training, dark green. Come on, follow me." As he leaned against a melted refrigerator, Dabi turned to face Izuku, who could have sworn he saw some scorch marks on the nearby trash and evidence of ash having been here before. "Alright, dark green, you claim to have a fire quirk, but when I saw you use your quirk, all you did was make a wave of superheated air. So, our priority is to see if you can make fire, if not then we'll just assume your quirk evolved while you neglected it. Luckily it looks like you're immune to being burned since you were unaffected by the scalding hot air. But that may not be the case for your clothes and anything else you wear. So, try and make some fire then show me what you can do." Izuku nodded, moved to the center of the space, closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and attempted to call forth his flames. However, Dabi just stared at the teenager, waiting for something to happen, and Izuku didn't even feel any heat. Dabi made the decision to step in after Izuku made every effort to rekindle his flames without success. Izuku opened his eyes to see Dabi angrily saying, "Okay, stop before you do something stupid. You're trying to force the flames out, you're treating them like some foreign power when they're not. The flames are a part of you, you just have to let them out. I know all you did yesterday was make a heat wave, so maybe try summoning that again." This time, Izuku chose to sit in the center and concentrate on himself. Okay, so just make a heat wave, that should be simple. Izuku took another deep breath, relaxed, closed his eyes, and concentrated on himself. Dabi kept watching and became irritated that Izuku was not doing as he had instructed. Dabi walked toward Izuku and said, "Okay, stop, you're still trying to force the flames out," but he paused for a moment when he became aware of the slight temperature shift around Izuku. Although it wasn't hot, the air was warmer around Izuku. However, Dabi noticed that the warm air only reached about 3 feet away from Izuku. Then, as Izuku became irritated and lost focus, the air began to cool. Dabi looked at Izuku and pondered, "Damn it, I can't do it. Why? I know I have a fire quirk, so why is it not listening to me?" As he evaluated what he had found, perhaps the air around him is colder than the air he exhales if he was unaware of the temperature change. He may still be weak to fire because he unconsciously builds a cooling barrier to keep himself alive and not on fire all the time. However, when the body hasn't had time to adapt to the effects of a quirk he never uses, that's to be expected. What, though, did he do to warm the air? What gave him the ability to produce yesterday's intense heat wave? Yes, his eyes were filled with sorrow and rage, perhaps this is the secret. Izuku put his hand to his chin and started to reflect on his feelings from yesterday. "Hey, don't worry if you can't get it up. But I am curious, tell me, what did you feel when you used your quirk yesterday?" Izuku became enraged at his lack of authority, which allowed Inko to die, as the fleeting memories of Inko's death suddenly came flooding back to him. Izuku, however, composed himself and responded to Dabi. "When I got there and looked at Bakugo, I felt angry at myself for letting someone I care about get hurt. Then my legs just moved. I don't know if I moved out of anger or out of some other ideal, but I moved, and then I was slapped away. Then I got back up and felt extremely angry since I was about to let another person die because I couldn't do anything. Then poof, that massive heat wave shot out of me, and you stepped in." Dabi listened to Izuku and believed that he knew to assist the teenager. "So, emotions are the catalyst for your quirk. I'm guessing that you've been emotionally closed off for so long that it prevented you from feeling your quirk. So, your emotionlessness backfired on you. Without emotions for the quirk to use, it never had the opportunity to activate. Am I right? Of course, if that's the case, then to actually make fire, you're going to need more emotions than whatever you have in you at the moment. Basically, your quirk is weak right now because it has been starved of emotions." Dabi dissected Izuku in a matter of seconds after he looked down in embarrassment. The quirk was extremely weak because it had no emotions to use for fire, which was the worst thing to hear. And the fact that he had done this to himself over the years infuriated Izuku. "Okay, good to see that I'm right. Now here's what you're going to do. To strengthen your quirk, you're going to need to destroy that dam in your head that blocks all your emotions. That dam is the reason you're emotionless. Once that dam is gone, then your quirk will have some fuel. I know this because, believe it or not, my emotions make my flames stronger, so I can see the issue." Izuku gave Dabi a curious look but concluded he might as well follow his advice. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes once more. This time, however, he looked within himself for his heart. However, Izuku found nothing to help him express his feelings. Izuku reasoned that he was unable to identify his emotions because his heart had become so accustomed to not feeling them. Izuku became irritated at his incapacity and attempted to vent his anger in the hopes of starting a fire. Izuku scrunched his face, searching for anger to channel, but he was unable to find it in himself. Izuku's only self-observation was the fog that obscured his vision and kept him from identifying his feelings. But as Izuku searched, his quirk was fueled by his slight annoyance at the lack of results. Izuku scrunched his face in frustration, searching for some emotion, and Dabi watched. "This must be difficult for you because you have never expressed your feelings. It's hard to find something you don't even know exists, but he should have no trouble expressing emotions like anger. Don't tell me he even pretended to be angry the entire time." However, Dabi felt the air heat up once more as he made theories about Izuku's emotional state, but this time it was hotter. It felt like Dabi was standing in the sun on a hot day, but it wasn't intolerable. As Dabi looked more closely, he could see that Izuku was truly angry, which confirmed to him that the heat was coming from rage. Izuku saw the same scene from that night as he searched his mind for his feelings. The memories were clearer now, and he saw Inko's face and fate. However, the pain that accompanied the memories also returned. Dabi was disappointed when Izuku flinched and lost all focus, causing the heat he was producing to vanish. Okay, dark green, now that you have some emotions coming forth, try keeping it up to exercise your quirk. You'll know it's working when you're feeling pretty toasty. And when that happens, just let that heat out, and boom, you've made fire. Izuku took a few deep breaths to re-inflate his oxygen supply after losing focus. When Dabi saw how exhausted Izuku was, he began to reflect. His efficiency is awful if he's this exhausted after just creating another heat wave that wasn't even as strong as the one he created yesterday. Similar to a blocked vent, all of the air is striking the vent, but only a tiny amount is escaping. He works out and runs frequently, so he has the stamina to keep going, but his starved quirk is eating away at his emotions and needs something else to rekindle them. Dabi gave Izuku something to work with, but he remained motionless. Izuku sat motionless instead, hesitating to use his quirk. Izuku knew that reliving the agony of losing Inko was too much for him. Why do I feel so weak? Even a heat wave is beyond my capabilities. I am completely useless. And I was upset with myself for not being able to create a heat wave, which is the only reason I succeeded. I can't even use my quirk correctly. I'm pitiful. Dabi was unaware of what had caused Izuku's emotional distress, but he could see that the teenager was upset. Dabi noticed that Izuku was doing nothing, and it made him question whether he was beginning to withdraw into himself once more, thereby stifling all of his feelings. Dabi would have to do something he never enjoyed in order to resolve this issue. He would need to speak openly with Izuku once more. Dabi sensed Izuku's frustration and wondered if he might have exacerbated the situation, but Izuku turned to face Dabi. Okay, dark green, what is it? What has you so tense? If you keep this up, you'll never be able to control your quirk and get stronger. Izuku's face, however, was a mixture of pain and emotionlessness. Bakugo walked over to where Izuku was just as Dabi was about to respond. As Bakugo entered Izuku's current heat wave, he screamed, "Oi, Scarface! What's going on over here? And why is it suddenly warmer over here?" Dabi was a little relieved because he had hoped that someone Izuku knew might be able to lift him out of his current rut. Yo, Izuku, did you manage to make fire? Is that why the air around you is warmer? Izuku stared at Bakugo and then at Dabi without saying anything. Bakugo and Dabi could both see that Izuku was not feeling well. Bakugo was unaware of the reason, but Dabi suspected it. All he needed to do now was verify it and see where it led him. Dabi seemingly figured out what was wrong with Izuku as he stared at him and said, "Okay, dark green, what's got your panties all the way up your ass?" "No, don't tell me." Bakugo looked at the two of them, wondering what was going on, and Dabi let out a huge sigh, which only made the blonde teenager more irate. Bakugo screamed as tiny explosions burst across his hands. "Would someone tell me what the fuck is going on?" As they waited for an answer, Bakugo and Dabi looked at Izuku and said, "Well, the heater over there hates how his powers activate. Am I wrong, Izuku?" Izuku turned to them, his shoulders dropping, and he sighed. Izuku tried his best to conceal his feelings, but his face was slightly pained as he said, No, you're not wrong." When Dabi noticed that Izuku was in pain, he was prepared to give up on the teenager, but Bakugo was able to sense Izuku's anguish and anger. The nerd is likely angry at the way his abilities operate and is also likely enraged by the fact that he is unable to start any fire. Izuku will immediately retreat into his shell if I don't take action soon. Izuku still wants to try to get stronger, and I can sense that. However, if things continue this way, that resolve will vanish, leaving me with only a shell of him. Bakugo went to Izuku because he didn't want his rival and new brother to continue in this manner. Bakugo looked down at Izuku with a mix of disappointment, pity, and rage. Bakugo simply followed his instincts because he had no idea how to handle the situation. Dabi saw Izuku become enraged at Bakugo's taunting and general dickishness, saying, "Seeing you like this makes me want to puke. This isn't the Izuku I know, even if you've been acting and faking all your emotions for years, this isn't you." An angry Izuku would push forward, he wouldn't wallow in self-pity. Bakugo then let out a deep sigh and gave Izuku a light arm kick. "I won't let you go back that easily, that's a bitch's way out, and you aren't a bitch. So, tell me what's wrong so you can stop being a little pussy." Since Bakugo wasn't entirely incorrect, Izuku became more irate with him. "I detest it when Bakugo is correct. I'm behaving like a bitch, but how can I overcome this obstacle? I want to strengthen myself and make the most of my quirk." However, I become irrationally angry if I have to go through that trauma and pain again and again. So is it really worth it to get stronger? Bakugo was able to partially reach Izuku, as Dabi could see. The hot-headed blonde's attempt to assist Izuku was somewhat unexpected, but it also made Dabi think of his own family. Even though they were aware of the risk he was taking, they never stopped encouraging him. They supported and cared for me even when I was at my lowest. Fuck, the little shit is beginning to grow on me, even though they knew I was a danger to myself. Perhaps Izuku needs some of that support. After approaching the two teenagers, Dabi stood beside Izuku and inhaled deeply before turning to face the disheartened Izuku. "Hey look, I ain't good at this sort of thing, but I guess you need to hear this. Despite what you're feeling, you need to push past this. You claim to have a fire quirk, so maybe this will help you understand what kind of power you have. Your quirk appears to work with emotions, and something else to make the spark. But you can't make flames because of one simple reason." Izuku looked up at the burnt man, who was clearly doing his best to support him, with a pathetic and listless expression on his face. Izuku never imagined Dabi would do this. Since Izuku appeared to react favorably to that, Dabi decided to be direct with him, asking, "Then what's that simple reason?" "The reason that you can't make fire is because flames are life. Flames represent life because they are brought into this world and then they die out eventually. And because flames are life, when we use them, we have to live life alongside the fire. This means when we use fire, we must experience all the aspects of life. All the moments where we are happy and at peace, but that means we also must experience all the moments where we're depressed, angry, and sorrowful. To use fire, we have to experience life, something you have refused to do for a long time." There were no arguments with Dabi's remarks, but Izuku detested how it made him feel unworthy of having his quirk. Dabi and Bakugo saw that Izuku was having trouble accepting that fact. "I have to live my life and remember all the suffering in order to truly use my quirk, but I am unable to do so." Izuku's face had soured, and Dabi could see right away that he was upset about what he had told him. Bakugo was going to speak and do everything he could to make Izuku stop being a bitch and deal with the truth. However, Dabi was agitated and annoyed by Izuku's behavior, so he beat him to it. Izuku looked at Dabi, perplexed and a little irritated, as he attempted to come to his own conclusion. "Look, dark green, it sucks to suck, but that's how most fire quirks work. Emotions play a big role. My emotions make my flames stronger. Your emotions just happen to be required for your quirk to work. But you must understand something, fire is life. So, your biggest struggle is being real and sincere with yourself." Izuku's voice slowly rose, indicating that he was growing irritated with everything. "I get what you're saying, but what do you want me to do about it?" he asked. It was time to push because Dabi could sense that he might be reaching Izuku. Bakugo, who was listening to the entire thing, was unable to find anything to dispute Dabi's assertions. "What you need to do is stop lying to yourself about what you want and who you are. You have to accept who you are and not run or deny it anymore. You need to stop calling yourself a bad guy and doubting your motivations dark green. You need to accept yourself and move on from what happened in the past." Additionally, it caused Bakugo to consider his knowledge of Izuku. Izuku never accepted himself after Inko's untimely death because he constantly escaped from his peculiarities and feelings. Izuku always carried a heavy emotional burden with him when he moved on and hid, and as the pain and guilt increased over the years, the burden continued to grow. When Bakugo noticed that Izuku had become quieter and more reserved over the years, he could see it beginning to have an effect on him. However, Izuku also began to talk about heroes less and less, as if he was sequestering himself in his own thoughts to keep himself from unraveling. Is that it? Does the nerd not think his quirk can make him a hero? How long has he been suppressing all these feelings? I understand that he doesn't want to harm people, and he has made the decision to strengthen himself in order to stop this from happening again. But will he find that sufficient? Or, after all these obstacles he erected have been removed, will it restore the former Izuku? Bakugo noticed that Dabi's remarks were making Izuku agitated and angry. He could even see that Izuku was making a concerted effort to repress the pain in order to maintain some measure of control over his life. Bakugo became enraged upon witnessing Izuku's uncertainty and mental distress, so he came forward and made every effort to help Izuku overcome his traumas and regain his breathing. Bakugo could see that Izuku was becoming agitated based on his twitching eye and protruding neck veins. "Nerd, you need to move past this. I get that it hurts to be reminded of what happened. But that pain is holding you back, aren't you tired of being hurt all the time? You have a chance to move past it all. For the first time in a while you have a goal, and all you have to do is stop blaming yourself. Bakugo remarked. Izuku tried to defend himself by saying, "Shut up. The moment I open up I'll be assaulted with memories of pain and feelings of anger. I just don't want to be pissed or sad all the time is all." But Dabi had to ask. Really? The guy who beats the shit out of people with an angry face doesn't like feeling angry or sad all the time. Newsflash punk, you've gone your entire life feeling those emotions and bottling them up, you're just conscious of them now. And now you have to accept those emotions as part of yourself and let them guide you to strength. Dabi said with a voice that was almost demanding that Izuku accept himself. Come on nerd, you've made progress, don't waste it. You've gone your whole life rejecting yourself, and now you have a chance to accept yourself. You can't run away from who you are, not this time and not anymore. You want to prevent another incident, right? Then you have to accept yourself before you can be strong, dumbass. Bakugo was doing his best to encourage his brother ahead. Listen to the firecracker. If you want the strength to prevent stuff, you have to accept yourself. All the good and bad things about you are just who you are, dark green. Izuku simply gazed at the two of them while standing there. They wanted him to embrace his uniqueness and use it to his advantage. Izuku simply couldn't do that, and he wasn't even sure why, how to deal with his feelings, whether he wanted this or not, or whether this was the right course of action. Izuku eventually showed more real feelings once more, but this time he was nervous. Because Izuku was even more enraged by the fact that he knew nothing. Dabi and Bakugo shielded their eyes from the intense heat wave that suddenly erupted from Izuku. When they looked up after adjusting, they saw Izuku's face, which was both sad and angry. Izuku turned and started running after deciding he had had enough and that shouting at them would not help. The teenager, a raging furnace, fled into the dump somewhere, and the two boys watched. Dabi ran his burnt hands through his black hair and screamed in frustration, "Damn it, I thought pushing him to finally accept himself would do the trick. Damn him and his stupidly thick skull." Bakugo did not move. Instead, he gazed at the direction Izuku was running. The nerd has always been like that. No one can convince him to do anything unless he wants to do it. I've tried for years to get him to accept himself, then yesterday we made some progress with him. And now he's trying to revert. Damn it, what made him pussy out? Bakugo was overcome with anger at this point. However, Dabi had some information that could be useful to them. The punk told me yesterday that he just wants to protect people from himself, and he does that by rejecting himself. Dabi looked in the direction Izuku ran off in, annoyed that he was on the verge of making progress before bitching out. My best guess is that he's hesitant to use his quirk since it would require him to feel things. Combine that with the fact he's been emotionally closed off for so long, he has no idea how to properly control his emotions. Bakugo tried to think of a way to help Izuku and said, "I'm well aware of that dumbass. I didn't ask for a fucking synopsis of his mental health, moron. I want to know how we can fix this shit because his self-rejection is getting really fucking old." Unbeknownst to them, however, a slender, blonde man who was searching for a location to train his new pupil witnessed everything. Perhaps I ought to look into it and see if I can assist that young man. He appears to be in distress. What sort of hero would I be if I failed to assist someone in need? It wasn't difficult to locate the irate boy because he was still releasing a huge wave of intense heat as a result of his emotions being in such a chaotic state. Toshinori started walking in the direction he had last seen Izuku run off in. Izuku saw Toshinori, and his flames went out immediately as his mood shifted back to concealing his feelings. "Oh, young Midoriya, I had no idea the boy that ran off was you, although in hindsight the massive heat wave should have made it obvious." Izuku looked down in frustration and sadness as Toshinori sat next to him. "That's a neat trick with your quirk, so how are you doing? What made you run off like that?" Izuku couldn't think of a way to explain this to Toshinori without giving away too much. Toshinori focused all of his attention on Izuku because he did pique his curiosity in an odd way. "Well, I actually have a fire quirk, and I use the oxygen in my body to keep the flames going, but the thing that ignites the oxygen and keeps it burning is my emotions, so that's the trick." Izuku claimed to have a fire quirk, but he has only created localized heat waves thus far, which piqued his interest. Toshinori's interest was interrupted when he heard Izuku go on. Even after all these years, Izuku was not yet prepared to deal with the pain, so he looked down in sadness and said, but there is one drawback: the emotions that keep the flames burning are negative emotions, and they happen to be the emotions that make the spark for the flames. Toshinori wanted to live up to his title as number one here, so he tried to assist Izuku after noticing how upset he was and feeling sorry for him. Izuku simply nodded his head in agreement, saying, "I see, and you don't want to face those emotions, do you?" Despite his sympathy for the teenager, Toshinori did see a bright side. As Izuku looked up at Toshinori, perplexed, he asked, "Well, that certainly does suck, but if you ask me, it's a good thing." Toshinori could see that Izuku was aware of his problems and thought that perhaps he could help him move forward if he gently prodded him. "What do you mean? I have to be sad or angry to use my flames, and even then, I can still hurt people with my flames, making them more powerful so they can hurt more people. It's a negative feedback loop. And I can't even make my flames come out because I've been so emotionally closed off that I've starved my quirk of emotion." Toshinori sighed deeply and turned to face the ocean, looking past all the trash. "Yes, that is true, but most people forget that everyone has emotions. Heroes do all the time, so they try to suppress their emotions and it destroys them from the inside, almost like what's happening with you, yes." Izuku looked at Toshinori with inquisitive, "I know what internal conflict looks like, young Midoriya. I saw it in you when we first met, and I wanted to help you with it. People with internal conflict need help, but they're always afraid to ask for help. But back on topic, most people neglect emotions, except you. Your quirk requires you to be in touch with your emotions, and that is an amazing thing. True, they're negative emotions and no doubt they cause you tremendous mental pain. But those experiences and emotions make you who you are. I don't know what caused you to go through such anguish and emotional stress, but I know that you would be a very different person if it wasn't for those negative emotions and experiences that helped shape you into the young man you are." Izuku simply stared at the slender man before him with bewildered and conflicted eyes. He didn't know how true what Toshinori was saying was. In the hopes that his counsel would be somewhat helpful, Toshinori gazed at the ocean while Izuku simply looked down. He would then hear Izuku reveal something shocking to him. "I killed my mom," Izuku said, his voice dry and emotionless as he struggled to contain his grief and rage over her passing. Inquiring for clarification, Toshinori blinked and slowly turned to face Izuku with perplexed but empathetic eyes. Izuku took a deep breath and looked down, covering his face with his hair's shadow as he spoke, suppressing all of his feelings. "What, young Midoriya, please repeat yourself, I want to make sure I heard you right." When I first got my quirk, I killed my mom, and since then I never used my quirk again. I have suppressed all my emotions ever since then. I once said I wanted to be a hero, but all my quirk is good for is killing and hurting people. What kind of hero is that? So, I quickly forgot about being a hero. I don't want to hurt people and I don't want to feel the pain of killing my mom again. Izuku put his hands over his face and felt like crying as memories of his past flashed through his mind. Toshinori gave Izuku a pitying look as he realized why Izuku had been reluctant to accept his offer of training. And seeing someone so young carrying such a burden of guilt broke his heart. In addition to his past experiences making it difficult for him to accept himself, he is unsure if he can be a hero with a quirk like that. Furthermore, because he suppressed these feelings, he is unsure of how to deal with them. I regret not being able to assist Izuku sooner. How much torture has he subjected himself to? However, I can now change things and assist Izuku in resolving his problems. Toshinori turned back to the ocean and inhaled deeply. Izuku found the silence between the two to be agonizing. Izuku became nervous and afraid of what the hero would do and say to him after Toshinori hardly responded to the news. But after gathering his thoughts, Toshinori turned his head slightly to the sky. Toshinori lifted his shirt, revealing a truly enormous scar on his body. "I understand, my boy, that you don't want to use your powers to harm people again, and that you don't want to be reminded of the terrible past you had. I'm the same way. I don't take joy in fighting people, and I hate to be reminded of my greatest failure in the past. 5 years ago, I got into a nasty fight with a villain, and I lost half my respiratory system. Honestly, me being here is a miracle. That was my greatest failure because I made it so I could only be All Might for a few hours a day. Imagine how many people need my help and I can do nothing but stand there because I'm powerless. I often wonder how many lives have let slip through my fingers because I wasn't strong enough to be there for them. But even when I do have the power, I can easily overdo it to the point of no return, and in the process, I will have taken a precious life." Izuku gazed at Toshinori, an odd sense of sympathy growing within him. Izuku then replied in his usual uninterested adolescent manner. Toshinori simply sighed and went on, but he smiled slightly because Izuku had just shown that he could hardly forget his pain. I don't think that's exactly the same thing, but maybe it's in the ballpark here. I wouldn't be so sure about that. Both our powers are dangerous. But the difference between us is that I finished my training and mastered my quirk, you're just starting. However, you have yet to understand what power means. My quirk can easily kill or hurt people, but I take that destructive force and use it to help people. Your flames can be a blessing to this world because there may be problems only you can solve. And the negative emotions you have come from you running away from the problem of accidentally killing your mother, and locking yourself away as a form of coping. Instead of running, take responsibility for the incident, face it head on, and understand and accept the anger and pain that follows. Then, after some hard work, turn your own destructive abilities into a force of good to prevent something like that from happening again. You want strength, right? Then stop running away. Truly strong people run headlong into battle to protect what they can reach. Despite his best efforts to sound inspirational, Toshinori was unsure of what he could do for Izuku beyond helping him overcome his previous trauma. However, the hero hoped that Izuku would be able to overcome this obstacle by using what he had learned from his experiences. Izuku looked down, inhaled deeply, and then turned to face Toshinori. I think I get what you're saying, but what if I can't attain the strength I desire? What if I do more harm than good? What if I kill more people? What if I can't control my emotions? Toshinori put his hand on Izuku's back. Toshinori's face softened as Izuku shook his head and asked, "Can your quirk predict the future, young Midoriya?" Izuku looked down thoughtfully as Toshinori searched his face for a response. Being truly strong includes much more than just strength. Look at some heroes, for example. Yes, heroes save people all the time, but they also inspire people and help them in any way they can. Whether or not you can control your quirk or emotions is not the question. The question is, do you want to protect people, and not just from your quirk? Toshinori asked. Is it just that I want to protect people that makes me want to be strong? Did I want to be a hero for that reason? Sincerely, I can't recall why I want to be a hero, but perhaps as I strive for strength, I'll discover the reason. But am I prepared to follow this course? Izuku's expression was uncertain as he looked up at the same ocean Toshinori was gazing at. I don't remember why I wanted to be a hero, but maybe I can find that reason again as I pursue the strength needed to protect my family. But I do have one question, Toshinori. Go ahead, young Midoriya, I'm listening. Toshinori focused entirely on Izuku's distressed face. Toshinori reassured Izuku by patting his back and saying, I will do my best to accept responsibility for what happened in the past. I will try to be strong. But how will I know when I'm ready to try? As Izuku turned back to the ground, Toshinori concluded with a smile. You won't. Anything anyone does in the world is usually a leap of faith, so you won't know when you're ready to try. It will just be a leap of faith. Izuku closed his eyes and considered those words, a leap of faith, huh? After some introspection, he concluded that if it was a leap of faith, perhaps now was the time to take action. Izuku opened his eyes and looked at them determinedly, knowing that he had to try. Izuku stood up, moved a few feet away from Toshinori, inhaled deeply, and then closed his eyes once more. Izuku made every effort to ignore the recollection of his flames murdering Inko. Izuku was overcome by the sadness and rage that accompanied the memories the moment they were brought back to him. Take responsibility for the incident and stop running from it. Izuku struggled to let his anger flow through him as he accepted it as a part of himself, but he didn't fight it. When he saw the burning picture of his mother in the burning house, he felt all the raw, trapped emotions pass through him without clinging to anything. Izuku could feel the emotions heating him up, and he felt his body tremble. The memories then began to hurt, and Izuku flinched as the agony burned in his brain, making it impossible for him to forget what he had done. It's a leap of faith. Izuku chanted the words in his mind, and they let him just let it all out. His breathing became labored as he tried to push past the pain. Everything moved forward as though the gate of a dam had broken, including the suffering, rage, violence, grief, and sadness. Izuku began to perspire and breathe deeply, which made Toshinori wonder what he was doing. Toshinori, however, could not take his eyes off of Izuku and continued to watch the teenager's expression of intense distress. Then, almost immediately, Toshinori was struck by a blast of intense heat. The heat dried up the fresh morning air and burned all the water in the air, so he covered his eyes. Then Toshinori noticed something incredible. He noticed a tiny black flame on Izuku's shoulder when he turned to look back, followed by more on his back, and still more. After a few more seconds, Toshinori watched as Izuku's form was consumed by violent black flames, almost causing his eyes to pop out of their sockets. Toshinori sharpened his focus and noticed that Izuku was breathing more rapidly, perspiring profusely as he attempted to do so, and his face was filled with intense pain and rage. Toshinori thought it would be improper to say that Izuku could stop. Finding Izuku's limits, working to reach them, and then finding more limits was the only way he could see Izuku succeed. Izuku heard Toshinori's words, "Keep going Izuku, don't stop. Don't let the flames die out yet," and made the decision to give it his all, even if it meant hurting himself. Izuku let it all out in a yell that was filled with pain and anger. Toshinori exclaimed, "RRRRRRRAAAAAGGGGGGHHHHH." In amazement at Izuku's feat, a huge pillar of black flames erupted from Izuku and stretched into the sky, creating a black beacon that was visible to everyone. Izuku's yell gave him the boost he needed. Since Izuku was the only source of heat, the morning air around them dried up, but the heat wave didn't spread any farther. Toshinori's face took on an expression of amazement as he gazed up at the black flame pillar, attempting to gauge its height. However, Toshinori's eyes widened once more as he looked back down at Izuku. Izuku stood there engulfed in black flames, and he could swear he saw a burning feminine figure looking at him with a gentle smile on their face as they gave him a fierce yet tender hug. Toshinori rubbed his eyes, opened them again, and saw that the figure had vanished. He dismissed it as his imagination playing tricks. However, Toshinori noticed that Izuku turned around and faced him while still covered in black flames. Oddly, he was grinning softly as he breathed even more forcefully. Toshinori could see the pain and rage in Izuku's smile, but oddly, he thought that Izuku was simply expressing his feelings as he attempted to accept responsibility for the accident and his burden. That was the tipping point for Toshinori, who was beaming broadly. However, Izuku prevented him from having the final say. "Hey small mite, that leap of faith Worketa, I think I might be able to become strong." Izuku used up all of the oxygen in his blood, which caused him to faint shortly after, ending his fierce moment. Izuku returned to Dabi and Bakugo gradually after he awoke and thanked Toshinori for all of his assistance. He felt weak after using up all of the oxygen in his body, so he was trying to get stronger along the way. When Izuku returned to Dabi and Bakugo, they sat him down and cursed at him for being, in Dabi's words, a sad neurotic sissy. However, they soon stopped talking when Izuku gained some resolve and confronted his past once more. Izuku conjured up a huge pillar of black flames once more in a moment of glory. But Izuku was on his knees, panting, after just a few seconds. Bakugo and Dabi, however, were too shocked to speak. Bakugo was astonished by Izuku's strength, but he was also relieved that Izuku had momentarily conquered whatever was preventing him from moving forward. Nevertheless, the anguish and anger remained. Dabi was astounded by Izuku's size and strength. He didn't believe that Izuku had flames that violent, nearly identical to his own, but now that Izuku had successfully called forth his flames, it was a great opportunity to learn. After taking a few breaks to refuel, Izuku spent the remainder of the morning gaining some much-needed control over his flames. Izuku can conjure a tall, violent shroud of black flames at his current level, but he has little control over it. Luckily, the heat around him has also stopped growing. Izuku was able to exert some control over his flames with Dabi's assistance, but Dabi now wanted Izuku to try different things to see if his black flames had any special qualities. Izuku was able to work on control for the majority of the day because he was suspended from school, but this was a bad idea. Izuku burned through the entire supply of oxygen in his body numerous times during the day, which caused him to faint 3 times and almost faint multiple times due to his peculiarity. But he could resume training after taking a short break to replenish his oxygen supply. Naturally, Dabi was a frustrating teacher because he never imparted any knowledge to anyone and instead allowed Izuku to repeatedly exhaust his oxygen supply. The best thing Dabi could advise was to concentrate on the flames and see what he could control while keeping in mind how big the flames were. However, Izuku was left to try and figure it out on his own because he didn't know how to do most of that. However, by the time the sun was starting to set, Izuku was starting to learn how to control the size of his flames. While Dabi sat on a pile of trash and gazed out to sea, Izuku was sitting in the sand panting and trying to catch his breath in order to get more oxygen into his body. Izuku finally caught his breath, and since the punk teen was growing irritated, he simply had to ask Dabi where he was taking this training. To get Dabi's attention, Izuku yelled, "Oi Dabi! What the fuck is the plan for my training? All I've learned to do is control the size of my flames, what next?" Seeing that he didn't feel like yelling at the criminal he had to train, Dabi started to descend the mountain of trash. Dabi leapt from the rubbish heap and landed in front of Izuku, standing over him and staring at him. Izuku looked at Dabi as if he were crazy, expecting an insult, but instead he received a candid analysis. The biggest thing you need to focus on right now is flame control, that way you can avoid unintentionally hurting people. After all, from what I've noticed, your flames are different from regular flames, so you need to get pretty good control over them before we can even think about progressing your training. Sure, you're a fast learner, but you still need the experience. He lit a cigarette, put it in his mouth, and took a long drag. Izuku tilted his head at Dabi and asked, "What do you mean by my flames are different? Like in what way are they different? I get that they're very hot and directly controlled by my emotions, but how else are they different?" Dabi pointed at Izuku after puffing smoke into the air. "Well, for starters, your flames aren't just controlled by emotions, they're heavily dependent on emotions. That showed when you needed to get your emotions in check today before you could even make fire. I don't know what changed in you and I couldn't care less, all that matters is that you're somewhat comfortable with summoning your flames now. But emotions are just one thing on the checklist, your temperature is also different from other flames. If I'm right, you have a huge range for temperature control, hell you could even make room temperature flames or flames so hot they melt steel when you get close. But more training is needed to do that if you're going to go that far. There's also the size of flames you can output. Typically regular flames grow about as big as their fuel source, but you can juice up our flames to make a huge ass pillar of black fire with them. You might even be able to send out a huge ass wave of flames in all directions if you felt like it." Izuku just stared at Dabi in disbelief, saying, "He saw me today and understood all of that. At the start of the day, where the devil was this?" Knowing that he would not receive the answer at this time, Izuku simply sighed. Dabi took another drag of his cigarette and blew the smoke at Izuku, who waved it away with a noncommittal expression. "Okay, so I can probably alter the temperature and size of my flames freely. Is there anything else that makes my flames different, or is that it?" Dabi asked. Izuku simply tilted his head in confusion at Dabi, who sighed and took a long drag from his cigarette before continuing. "There's plenty more, though these are theories I came up with while watching you. I believe you can conjure things with your flames if you focus hard enough. Like make a giant fire hand or focus your flames into a flame sword or flame whip, stuff like that. Look, what I'm trying to say is that the versatility of your flames is high as fuck. Not only do you have the capacity to shoot out flame streams from your body like I do, but your flames can manifest in different ways. If you concentrate hard enough, you could maybe make a giant flame hand at room temperature flames to grab something. And even then, you can pump up the heat to make your flame conjurations and flame streams melt potentially anything it touches. You got some real power, kid, and I have no idea where your potential ends. But we need to exercise your quirk more since it's been starved of emotions for so long, hence why learning control is so critical." Izuku asked in utter bewilderment, "What makes you think I can do that? I don't even know if I can do that. So, what gave you the idea that I could do that?" He didn't know how Dabi came up with these theories because they sounded ridiculous. Izuku has never created a flame and he has never before sprayed flames in a concentrated stream from his hands or feet. With a sigh, Dabi extinguished his cigarette and burned the butt before turning to face Izuku in frustration. "Oh my god, do you ever observe your surroundings, dipshit? When you practiced control, I could see you were trying to focus the power on your hands, and it looked like you were about to make flame hands. This means you may have the potential to shoot fire and probably create flame conjurations. As for how far those aspects of your quirk can go, I have no idea, which is why we need to exercise your quirk and let it breathe." Izuku looked under his feet and there was a loud, "Oh," that emanated from him. Dabi simply gave Izuku a dumbfounded look and said, "So how do I go about making those things happen? I still don't know if I can do those kinds of things." "You won't know if you can do those things until you try, dumbass. However, you need to work on your control so you can get to that point. But for now, I guess a goal to work towards would help you get your flames under control. Let me think. Oh, I know, work on getting to this basic level." Dabi approached and gazed up at one of the large piles of trash on the beach. Izuku did nothing but watch as Dabi gazed at the pile of trash, unsure of what to do. However, a powerful blue flame erupted from Dabi's hand as he held it up. Dabi drew his hand back as quickly as the flames burst from it because of the heat and force of the flames. It started to burn in the evening sun with a cool blue light, and in a moment the mountain of trash was swallowed up by the blue flames. Dabi glanced back at Izuku's startled expression with weary eyes and a faint smile. You have to work up to the point where you could do that just like me, because that is a relatively simple move for a fire quirk. Izuku watched anxiously, wanting to get stronger so that another incident wouldn't happen. It appeared that the only way to get stronger was to actively use his flames, but he wasn't sure how to do it without hurting anyone. Izuku took a deep breath to calm himself in anticipation, then clenched his hands and looked down at them. Izuku got all his belongings and cleaned himself up after Dabi told him to go home. Izuku was yawning as he strolled down the street in the evening as the sun was sinking. In addition, he was thinking back on what Toshinori had said in the morning and what Dabi had told him at the conclusion of their training. Since he hadn't used his quirk in 10 years, Dabi had no idea how far he could go, but what he said was probably true. He had a ton of potential. Thus, it should be intriguing to observe his abilities. However, Toshinori assisted Izuku in beginning to accept his past and the emotions that accompanied it. Izuku was so grateful to the man because, for the first time in his life, he felt at ease and didn't feel the need to suppress his feelings, despite the fact that his habits had forced him to do so. Izuku claimed that he felt as though Inko was grinning down at him, which caused him to look up into the orange sky and smile a little. I'll try and get stronger. For you, Mom, I know you want me to be the best person I can be, so I'll give it my best shot. However, Izuku's moment would be interrupted when he heard some boys coming toward him. Izuku reminded himself, regaining his apathetic expression and stifling all emotions out of habit. Izuku could see it was a group of 5 high school boys as he looked forward. They were all staring at him with sour expressions, but Izuku could see the classmate he had knocked out yesterday when he looked behind them. His only change was that he appeared more battered than before. Izuku was aware that he had only struck him in the head with his desk to knock him out, not really beating him. Why, then, is he wearing so many bandages? Unless his classmate was involved, Izuku had no idea what they wanted from him, but he had a suspicion that they did. It made sense that his classmate would have done this as petty retaliation because Izuku had done nothing to offend them. Izuku's suspicions were confirmed when the boys came to a halt in front of him, and the leader with the dyed blonde hair moved a little farther away. With a voice that was clearly forced deep, the punk said, "So, you're the guy who sent my little bro into the nurse's office yesterday. Why'd you go and beat him up so hard like that?" Izuku simply gave the group an eye roll. "Me, I didn't beat him up to the point he needed those bandages. All I did was knock him out by hitting his head on his desk. You got the wrong guy." Izuku took a step back as the man approached him and shoved him. "Are you denying what happened? I saw him come home with those bandages and injuries to boot, and he told me it was you who sent him to the nurse's office. So quit playing stupid and accept the ass beating you're about to receive," he said. Izuku was already out of control of his anger, which only got worse when he noticed his classmates' shit-eating smirk. They were duped by that fucking bastard. Since he knew he couldn't do it himself, he most likely injured himself to get his stupid brother to pursue me. What a jerk. Listen, asshole, I didn't beat the shit out of your brother. He's lying to you. The leader turned back to Izuku, who was looking angry, after observing his brother pretending to be scared and hurt. "You calling my brother a liar? I ain't calling him a truther." Izuku swore as he pushed the blonde jerk away. He had improved his emotional state today and didn't want to lose it, so he wasn't in the mood to fight these jerks right now. Izuku's body began to heat up, but he quickly repressed the feelings and heat because he wasn't yet ready to use his quirk. "Nah, I think you're the liar. After all, you're the fucking villain here. My bro told me what you did, you damn villain." Izuku's jaw dropped at that remark, but he took a deep breath to avoid snapping at the man. He looked back to his goons for approval, but they all missed Izuku's expression darkening into one of rage. "Maybe if I beat the shit out of a good-for-nothing mommy killer like you, she would smile at me for avenging her life by beating up her villain son, and I could be a hero. What do you think, guys? Am I a hero for taking out this killer?" he said. "Yeah, you are a hero, dude. Let us take some of the credit as your sidekicks." The leader turned back to Izuku just in time to witness a strong kick headed directly for his head, but the boys continued to laugh at his expense. After tossing his belongings aside and drawing his leg back, Izuku kicked the leader in the head with great force and speed. The leader was knocked to the ground with the leg because of the force, and speed of the kick. As the thugs stared at their leader, who had been knocked unconscious by a single kick, there was a loud thud and a slight crunch. They all looked up to see Izuku standing carelessly on one leg as though nothing had happened, but his face conveyed a different reality. The goons were uneasy because Izuku appeared apathetically angry and prepared to beat them up, but one unfortunate person had the audacity to rush in and punch Izuku. Izuku dodged the lackey's punch by quickly shifting his weight and leaning sideways. Izuku decided to finish the job, so he brought his leg up for an axe kick after moving quickly and kicking the goon's legs out from under him, causing him to fall. Even though he was still furious, his face softened slightly as he knocked the goon unconscious by bringing his leg down on his head. The thugs remained motionless, but one of them regained consciousness and looked at Izuku's stunned classmate with a look of realization. The student broke his shock by responding, "Dude, you said his name was Izuku, right? What's his last name?" He's Izuku Midoriya. After learning the full name, the group's faces became pale. Izuku had been known to the high school students. Indeed, he was viewed as a villain, but he was also known for thrashing anyone who got in his way or irritated him. They all knew not to mess with Izuku Midoriya because of his fame, which is why he ran out of bullies to fight. One goon suddenly recognized Izuku and simply bowed and apologized. "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it was you, Sir Midoriya. We were unfamiliar with middle school fighters since we are in high school and not from this area. I hope you can forgive us for our stupidity." The classmate watched in disbelief as the other goons did the same, but one of them grabbed him and made him bow as well. Izuku simply sneered, gathered his belongings, and pushed past everyone to resume his walk home. His classmate turned to the thugs with curious eyes after he had left. "Guys, what was that about? What the hell?" they all said, staring at the child as if he were a complete moron, which he was. "Do you not know who he is?" "Obviously. Dude, I just moved here to live with my brother like a week ago." "What is he? Some sort of legend?" "All I know is what people told me." The high school students felt sorry for the boy because no one had given him the whole story, and as a result, he almost got kicked in the ass. "Well, Izuku Midoriya is one of the toughest guys around. He used to get bullied a lot and get his ass kicked. But then it was the bullies getting their asses kicked by him and his brother. There's not a delinquent in the area who doesn't know who Izuku is. Granted, we never picked on him since we were in a different area, so we never met him. But still, the dude is notorious for being strong. From what I heard, once he and his brother ran out of guys to fight, they started fighting each other for fun. But he only fights people when they insult sensitive subjects, so we must have really pissed him off to get him this angry at us. He had insulted the most infamous delinquent in the region." The classmate gulped at the news. The student merely hoped that Izuku wouldn't vent his anger on him at school. He attempted to exact revenge on him by banding together with his brother. The unkempt blonde buns behind a wall went unnoticed by the boys as they all pondered whether Izuku would pursue them. A girl came over to watch the blood spill onto the floor after hearing the commotion. But a black and green-haired man with overwhelming strength denied her that. But then a fresh, intriguing idea came to her. She blushed when she considered the possibility that if she simply followed him around, he might spill more blood. It wasn't like him to snap at people so quickly, so Izuku wondered why he had slammed into them like that as he was walking down the street. Although it wasn't the first time he became enraged, Izuku typically needed more reason to beat someone up. Izuku questioned whether it was worth it to go that far, even though the thugs did call him a killer because they brought up the incident and they should have been beaten for it. It didn't make much sense why he went that far. Usually he'd play with them, but this time he went straight for the finisher. He can handle the verbal abuse, but Izuku will not stand for anyone to treat her disrespectfully. Inko was a good mother, and he won't have anyone criticize her for raising a villain. However, Izuku recalled that as he became more aware of his emotions, they were a little less suppressed than before. Izuku's feelings were everywhere, just waiting to be dealt with, since he had finally begun to accept them. It's possible that he didn't know how to control his emotions because he has no experience with them. Now that my emotions are becoming less retrained, I guess they spurred me on. I'll need good control over them if I'm to use my quirk. I can't get angry like that when I use my quirk, although I may need to so I can use my flamesa. I'll have to practice more with Dabi tomorrow since I'm still suspended from school. Izuku was thinking about what to do, but he failed to notice the blonde girl following him. She was intrigued by Izuku after witnessing his strength, and she was thrilled about the possibility of witnessing him cause others to bleed. She followed him home, and when he entered, the stranger girl who had been following him grinned and turned to go, but she made sure to note the boy's residence for future reference. When Izuku entered his home, he was greeted by the aroma of Mitsuki preparing dinner for everyone. Bakugo was watching the news while working on his homework, and Masaru was seated at the table working on his computer. Izuku, who had nothing better to do, smiled a little at the atmosphere of the house and went to the kitchen to help Mitsuki. Mitsuki only needed to take one step into the kitchen to turn to face Izuku and strike him with a spatula. Looking up at her, Izuku's agitated eyes demanded an explanation for why she had struck him, and Mitsuki provided one. "I could smell you from a mile away. Go take a shower then help with dinner." Izuku simply gave a grunt and headed off in the opposite direction to go upstairs and shower. After entering the bathroom, Izuku undressed and prepared to take a shower, but not before glancing at his reflection in the mirror. For some reason, it felt weird to see himself. Izuku sensed that something had changed, even though there was nothing obviously wrong. Izuku assumed it was because he had experienced some significant change in a short period of time, but he was unsure of the reason. A wave of emotions struck Izuku like a speeding truck as his eyes fell on the chain around his neck. Izuku winced as all of his suppressed memories came flooding back to him. He was filled with a wide range of emotions, including sadness, grief, pain, anguish, depression, hopelessness, anger, wrath, fury, and many more. Izuku stumbled to his feet and leaned on the bathroom wall as he felt his body heat up. Izuku heated up and had no choice but to let his feelings run their course. He knew that he would eventually have to forgive himself for what he had done, but he was unable to do so no matter how hard he tried. Izuku was determined to stop another accident like that from happening because he still remembered seeing his mother die. This is what caused him to abstain from quirks for 10 years, but now the only way he could move forward was to alter his perspective and become stronger. Izuku grasped Inko's ring tightly and took a deep breath in an attempt to numb the pain or release the feelings. Izuku squeezed his eyes more tightly and looked for the most upsetting memories of his past. He then let them play in his mind to release the emotions, hoping that this would help him relax and repress the memories and feelings. Izuku kept allowing the pain to flow from the memories, trying to numb the sensations by experiencing them, but it was simply too much, at least for the moment. "I can't run away anymore. Mom wouldn't like my memories of her to bring me pain." Izuku repressed the feelings with all of his might and put on a face devoid of feeling. Izuku opened his eyes, breathing heavily and trembling a little, and noticed a tear drop from one eye fall into the sink. Izuku let go of the ring and cast a sorrowful glance down, but he took another deep breath and transformed his sorrow into resolve. "I will not let my emotions get the better of me. I will become stronger to prevent another accident like that from happening again." Izuku looked up and met his own eyes in the mirror. He was pleased to see the resolve in his eyes. He was happy that a tiny bit of his resolve had been able to support him during this difficult journey. Even though it still hurt to have to go through these feelings, he smiled a little because he thought that someone was happy for him because of his progress. After his emotional moment was over, Izuku showered and washed off all the sand and perspiration that had accumulated on his body. Although he was in one all day, Mitsuki wasn't lying when he said he smelled awful. However, Izuku was able to unwind and temporarily forget his difficulties because of the shower. It was soothing to feel the warm water run over his toned arms, chest, and abs. However, since I use fire quirk, I shouldn't be too bothered by warm weather. Izuku got out and dried his green and black hair before taking another look at himself in the mirror, but this time he was not depressed. Instead, he noticed the definition of his muscles in his nude body. He had 4 abs, and judging by Bakugo's intense training, he was on the verge of gaining a 6-pack. Izuku was very well built for his age, and he was definitely a looker, so all of his other muscles popped as well. Izuku froze in front of the mirror, wondering where that came from because that wasn't him at all. He couldn't stop his hormonal teenage brain from spitting out a few words while he was admiring himself. "Damn, I look good." Izuku had never previously described himself as hot and jacked, even though he knew it. He simply dismissed it and carried on with his evening as usual. Before going to bed, Izuku went to assist Bakugo with his homework and Mitsuki with dinner. But that night, he would dream about Inko, but this time, instead of fire, he would see them eating lunch on a grassy hilltop overlooking the neighborhood, surrounded by the warmth of the sun. Even Bakugo smiled when he checked on his sleeping brother before going to bed himself because Izuku's smile was so infectious while he was sleeping. Dawn at Dagoba Beach. The following day, which was the last day of Izuku's suspension, Izuku and Bakugo worked out at the dump in the morning in an effort to build up his strength and endurance. Bakugo had made the decision to change their training regimen for good. They would now run down to the dump every morning to train their bodies and quirks as part of their new routine. They would then return home, clean up, and leave for school. Dabi and Izuku would practice his quirk at the beach after school. Naturally, this plan wouldn't begin until Izuku was permitted to return to school tomorrow. Furthermore, even though Toshinori had promised to train Izuku, Izuku still needed to contact him to discuss how to do so. Speaking of Toshinori, he was presently standing on the sidewalk above the beach, observing Bakugo and Izuku. Toshinori was trying to come up with a plan for training Izuku. He could see that Izuku was already fairly well built, so if he wanted to, he could probably take one for all. He didn't get a chance to assist in Izuku's body training because Bakugo continued working out with him. Furthermore, Izuku had already found someone to assist him with his quirk, and Toshinori was unable to do so because he was unsure of what to do. Toshinori felt defeated and unable to think of anything to say. Toshinori smiled as he suddenly thought of a way to assist Izuku. I could maybe give him some actual combat experience, that's something he'll need to get. Maybe I can have him and Bakugo fight so they can get used to fighting. However, he saw Bakugo and Izuku fighting in the sand when he looked down at the beach. They were also accustomed to fighting because their bodies and instincts weren't too bad. With a deflated sigh, Toshinori said, "Well, back to the drawing board." He simply put his hands in his pockets and began to walk down the sidewalk, attempting to come up with a plan for training Izuku. Looking back again, Toshinori witnessed Izuku cut his arm open on a piece of metal after Bakugo threw him into a heap of trash. Izuku, however, was unfazed and hurried back in to kick Bakugo in the face with great force. As he left, Toshinori shook his head and grinned, saying, "The joys of youth." Dabi emerged from his trash house and sat down to watch Izuku practice flame control after Bakugo left for school. Dabi saw the numerous faces Izuku made when his flames were burning at this point. Although he was unable to identify the other faces, he could tell that Izuku was still uncomfortable with his feelings based on the way his flames responded, appearing to flare up one moment and then subside to a smaller size the next. At that moment, Dabi noticed that Izuku was completely engulfed in black flames, so hot that he could feel the heat and watch the sand begin to burn beneath him. However, Izuku's clothing and the chain around his neck were not burning or melting. Something piqued Dabi's interest, and he said, "Oi punk, stop for a second, I want to try something." Izuku paused and turned to face Dabi, who stood up and approached him. Dabi positioned himself directly beside Izuku, placed a hand on his shoulder, and then stood shoulder to shoulder with the adolescent. Izuku's eyes widened in concern as he said, "Okay, activate your flames like normal." "Are you sure about that? You'll get burned, dude." Izuku swallowed, but he had faith that Dabi knew what he was doing because he was also a fire quirk user. "I'm sure, I want to test something, and if needed I'm sure you can turn your flames off and I can take a quick bath in the ocean. I could use it to wash off this cigarette smoke." Izuku inhaled deeply and summoned his flames by bringing up a small part of his painful memories. Izuku was completely prepared for Dabi to scream. Izuku was shocked to see Dabi covered in the black flames when he turned to face him. "Dude, concentrate." Izuku shook his head and did his best to ward off the flames as Dabi's shock caused him to lose concentration and let them consume him. Dabi's cheek was dripping with cold sweat. Izuku tilted his head in perplexity, and Dabi simply sighed once more. "Phew. Thought you were about to flambe me for a second. Looks like my theory was correct. You unconsciously set up a barrier to separate yourself from the hot flames. You make the flames colder the closer they are to you, but the flames further away from you are hotter. It's like a reverse sun. The closer you get to the center the cooler the flames are, so they don't burn you and anyone next to you when you flare up. In fact, it actually feels quite nice in the center of your blaze, nice and cool. But this also shows me that you have a huge capacity for temperature control." Izuku's head lit up. "Oh yeah, that makes sense, so I guess I can shroud myself and whoever is close to me in cooler flames, but the closer you get to the outer flames the hotter it gets." That about sums it up, but it also makes me think that the hotter the flames get the more you'll feel it. So that means you'll need to work on your temperature fluctuation some more. But that makes me curious about something else. Turn the flames off for a second. After Izuku complied, Dabi moved to a pile of trash and motioned for Izuku to follow. Dabi instructed Izuku to place his hand on the mountain and start his flames after he followed instructions and approached it. He put his hand on a trashed refrigerator and noticed that some of the trash was burning. Dabi nodded and told him to turn it off before he saw Izuku push a dent into the refrigerator, raising his eyebrows in surprise. Yep, just as I thought, there is a limit to how far you can expand the cool flames. It looks like you can expand the cool flame about half a meter before the heat rises dramatically to the point where things get set on fire. Good thing we know now, but there is also a revelation about your quirk. Izuku gave Dabi another puzzled look, and Dabi simply indicated the spot where Izuku had pressed his hand into the stack of trash. When Izuku noticed a hand-shaped dent in the refrigerator's side, his eyes widened. It looks like your flames give you a small strength boost. It's probably related to my idea about the flame creations. Think about it like this: if you have a giant hand, you probably increase the amount of flames creating it, strengthening it, which reinforces the hand enough to where it is stronger than a normal hand, and your flames might give the hand enough weight to give it strength. If you apply that idea to your body where you increase the flames at a certain body part, you can probably increase the strength of that part of your body. I've never seen anything like this, so this is uncharted territory for me, but I want to see your limit. Izuku looked down at his in awe. Izuku reluctantly nodded and approached a piece of trash that was partially buried in the sand. To test it, go punch a piece of trash without the flames and then try it with your flames activated. Izuku pulled his arm back to punch the trash, and Dabi simply nodded at him. To everyone's surprise, Izuku threw out his hand, and then he clutched it when a loud bang was heard. When Dabi saw the child in agony, he simply laughed and tried not to smile. Izuku merely gave Dabi a furious look as he said, "I didn't think you'd actually do it," but Dabi simply raised his hands and went on. "Okay, now, this is a good time to try summoning your flames at a single part of your body. Try just summoning your flames on your arm. Feel the power want to leave through one body part and go from there." Izuku persisted in his angry glare at Dabi before giving in and getting to his feet after taking a deep breath. When he closed his eyes, feelings surfaced. He felt his body heat up, but he directed the heat toward his right arm. Izuku soon experienced both an overwhelming sense of power and the relief that came from extinguishing his flames in his right arm. Izuku opened his eyes, fighting to maintain the focus necessary to prevent the flames from engulfing his entire body. Large black flames were spreading violently and threatening to grow larger over Izuku's right arm. Izuku nodded, still fighting to contain the flames so they wouldn't grow any larger. Does it feel like all the power is rushing into your arm and trying to escape? Okay, try punching the trash now. Still fighting to put out the flames, Izuku walked over to the trash and then withdrew his arm. It was so hot that he thought Izuku's skin might melt off his arm as the power began to flow into it. Then Izuku began to pant and breathe heavily, as the violent flames were depleting his body of oxygen. Izuku decided to simply extinguish the flames and threw his arm out. Izuku punched the metal trash, causing it to separate from the sand and fly back 1 meter before coming to a stop with a massive, burning fist indentation in its side. There was a loud metal bang. Dabi just stared at the trash he punched while Izuku fell to his knees and began to take deep breaths. Because it wasn't hot enough to burn the metal for fuel, the black fire died out. Then he turned to see Izuku gasping for air. Holy shit, this kid has power. Dude, that was amazing for a full power flame punch, but that strength isn't particularly noteworthy yet. There are plenty of people who are much stronger than him. Well fuck kid, that's some extremely advanced pyromancy you got. You can cover yourself in flames, regulate the temperature to make it cool or hot as hell, control the size of your flames, partially increase your strength with them, and the theories I have are probably true too. You might actually be able to shoot fire and create flame creations. Of course, if you use the strength aspect, make sure you make the flame shroud around your arm as small as it can get to conserve oxygen. You don't need 3 feet of super hot flames coming off your arm when you're trying to move some heavy shit and then passing out due to oxygen loss. Izuku simply gave Dabi the thumbs up and took a deep breath. He was pleased to have discovered a new use for his quirk. And it appeared increasingly likely that he might be able to create objects with his flames and shoot streams of fire. Izuku burns through his oxygen far too quickly, so managing the flames was his main problem that needed to be addressed. All of Izuku's thoughts were focused on trying to solve the problem. My quirk of starvation for years and the size of my flames were probably the reasons why my oxygen was burning away too quickly. I create a huge pillar of black flames that devours my oxygen at an amazing rate when I'm not paying attention. I am surrounded by black flames when I concentrate, but they are usually fiercely burning away and were at least a meter high when they left my body. And the flames were enormous and extremely violent, burning through my oxygen like crazy just now when I threw all of my strength into my right arm. Honestly, Dark Green, you have the potential to become the strongest motherfucker around if you can get good control over your flames. Wait, you heard all that? Izuku exclaimed, blushing a little. For the first time in a long time, I felt ashamed. Izuku sighed and thought he should at least explain his old habit. Kind of hard to ignore it when you mumble like that. Yeah, I used to mumble when I got excited about stuff. It's a habit that I guess is starting to make a comeback. Izuku looked down and saw that he had reopened the cut on his arm from fighting Bakugo earlier. Well, I don't care if you get rid of it or not, all I'm here to do is train you and eat the breakfast you give me. Also, I'm done for the day, so make sure you get that cut on your arm checked out. Since it wasn't bleeding much, Izuku decided to just leave it and kept practicing his flame control with the ocean water. In order to prevent burning through his oxygen too quickly, Izuku worked on temperature and size control for the remainder of the day. He reduced the size so that the flames were only erupting a foot or so from him and it wasn't as violent all over his body. Izuku was still having trouble controlling the temperature, and he was still a long way from mastering single-limb flame summoning. Izuku was capable of single-limb summoning, but it quickly depleted his oxygen supply. He was not yet prepared for that, but he was able to extinguish a few flames. Izuku passed out from oxygen deprivation after the second Izuku erupted in violent black flames. If Izuku was going to shoot fire and use it as a strength enhancer, he needed more control over the temperature and size of his flames. As the day came to an end, Izuku packed up and started to walk home, exhausted from continuously using up all of his oxygen. Izuku was relieved that no one was around to witness him in this state as he strolled down a deserted street because it was evening. Unfortunately, it was the ideal moment for someone to attack him because it was so empty. Izuku was suddenly snatched by the collar and flung into an alley. Additionally, Izuku became lethargic as a result of his fatigue. They threw him against a wall, but he was too slow to react. Izuku was going to defend himself when he felt a blade against his neck. His blood turned cold, and he froze in fear of having his throat sliced open. Izuku had the opportunity to see a set of golden eyes staring directly at him after he stopped moving. Additionally, a large, toothy smile that displayed rather large canines accompanied them. Izuku then noticed the stranger's blonde hair in two unkempt buns, as if his assailant had hurried to place them there. At last he saw the pale skin and the flush that only grew more intense as the assailant gazed at him. Izuku finally made out a feminine figure, and he knew immediately that a girl was doing this to him. The two were locked in a silent stare-down as they watched each other, but only one of them had a knife to their neck that bore the silent threat, "Move or talk and you die." The girl then took hold of Izuku's wounded arm and pressed it to her lips. Izuku pondered what she would do, and he attempted to fight back, but the knife's thrust into his neck served as a reminder of the implied danger, forcing him to give up his arm. Izuku observed as she examined his wound by rolling up his sleeve, then bit into his arm to reopen it. The odd thing was that she appeared to be thoroughly enjoying herself as she licked up his blood and drank it, but Izuku was too shocked by the scene to try to fight it or feel the pain. As she licked up his blood, she appeared to be in a state of ecstasy. Izuku's face twisted into an angry one as he stood there helpless to stop the knife from digging deeper into his neck and drawing blood. The female aggressor of Izuku shifted her focus from licking up his arm to his neck. Izuku gasped in shock as she rushed to his neck and bit him before he could see her. Strangely, Izuku felt pleasure as she licked and sucked on his neck. Izuku believed this was his chance to get away when she took the knife off his neck to suck more, but he felt the tip against his crotch and realized that if he moved, he would have to bid his manhood farewell. At last, this insane vampire girl stopped sucking on his neck, biting him, and drinking from the cut. She took a step back, and Izuku saw that she was wearing nothing but a baggy school cardigan, and she was grinning broadly. She then gave Izuku a stern look, uttered a single word, and fled the alley as quickly as a cat on a run. As he ran off, she exclaimed, "I'll see you later, hot stuff." In a positive tone. Izuku attempted to follow her, but nobody was there when he left the alley. Izuku gave up, seeing no trace of his assailant, and turned to examine his cut forearm, which was bruised from the girl's intense sucking. He took a picture of his neck with his phone after she gave him a few bit marks and hickeys. Izuku was furious about what had just transpired. This bitch of a girl attacked me at knife point. What the devil? The police will just brush it off and say my girlfriend did it to me, so I can't call them. The next time I see her, she's dead. Izuku became furious and clenched his fist, causing heat to radiate from it. The next time that bitch comes at me, I'll smack the fuck out of her.
So this was it for the series. I hope you enjoyed it. To watch more series like this, subscribe to my channel. Till then, bye bye.